All right. Sounds good. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody to a very cold Transportation Commission meeting. Today is February 19th, 2025. Thank you all for your flexibility and being able to switch this to a virtual meeting. I think our conversation is the weather has been highly unpredictable lately. And the more we were seeing, the closer we were getting. We were getting a good deal of information about difficulty of travel, particularly from the western part of the state and the eastern part of the state, with the bitter cold out on the eastern plains, and then also potential difficulty travel at the end of the day. So thank you for your flexibility, allowing us to move this to virtual. We will go back to our in-person meeting schedule beginning again in March. So with that, we've gone ahead and get the meeting headed out here off the agenda. Very first item on the agenda we have today is a Floyd Hill funding and project update with Jessica.
All right. Good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you for your time today. We are here to do a Floyd Hill update, and you may remember on our bus tour with the commissioners, we were able to stop and have a really fantastic tour, kind of see the breadth and complexity of the Floyd Hill project. It's been a little while since we have given an actual official project update to the commissioners in an actual commission meeting. So we wanted to take some time to do that today and give some really critical updates. Wanted to introduce our project director, Kurt Kiyonka. He is the fearless leader of the I-70 Floyd Hill project. You met him on the TC bus tour, and I'm going to turn this over to him initially. Also joining us on this presentation is Piper Darlington with CTIO, and then I'll pick up a few slides at the end. So giving the floor to Kurt.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, commissioners. See several new faces here, so it's great to be back talking about the much-needed Floyd Hill project. Give you a good update today, just kind of review some of the pieces of the project for those of you that aren't fully familiar with Floyd Hill. And then we're going to turn it over to Piper to talk about some of the CTIO elements, and then back to Jessica to talk about some of the funding today. So next slide, please. And that rolls into why we're here today is really to highlight the progress that we've had on Floyd Hill, where we're at, where we're headed, and then also to secure the final funding for the project to deliver our last package that we're getting ready for here. So, Floyd Hill's been in the works for a long time now, all the way back to the early 2000s with PEIS. That led into the EA. That was signed in 2021 that led us into construction in 2023. So we've been in construction for about a year and a half now, 20 months, and got quite a bit done. We've delivered 3 packages to construction, with the eastern end of the project going first, and then we hopped over, started the western end, and then the third package is getting some of the early pieces to the middle section of Floyd Hill. And so all sections are underway through there if you drive through there today. We've also been really working to define our schedule, and I think we're in a really good place with our schedule, so we can have the milestones that we show here. So eastbound I-70 will be complete in its final alignment at the end of 2028. Actually, I have those flipped. I apologize for this. Eastbound is the end of 2027. Westbound will be at the end of 2028. And then the ancillary parts of the project with landscape establishment in the frontage road connection that I'll talk about here in a minute will be in 2029. Next slide, please. So just to review, what is the Floyd Hill project? Well, it's the much needed project improving 7 miles of I-70 from essentially milepost 248 to 241. 241 is that first exit to Idaho Springs in the westbound direction, and then 248 is at the top of Floyd Hill. We're delivering it in essentially 3 main sections. The east section, that's the first section that started construction in mid-2023, which is everything from the top of Floyd Hill, carrying all the way down to where US 6 gets off at the bottom of the hill near the quarry, and there's a little restaurant down at the bottom of the hill. The west section is everything to the west of Central City Parkway Hidden Valley interchange, and then the central section is everything in between. Next slide, please. So what are the project elements and the project benefits? Last weekend, very, very heavy travel day in the mountain corridor with the holiday weekend. Yeah, next slide, please. And so the need for the project really arises with that bottleneck that is created at the top of Floyd Hill. You have 3 lanes coming from the eastbound direction, drops down to 2 lanes at the top of Floyd Hill, creates a bottleneck. Traffic backs up during those peak travel times. So we're alleviating that bottleneck by providing a third travel lane through there, full-time tolled express lane between the top of Floyd Hill, which is Homestead Road, and then connecting that into the Mountain Express lanes at Idaho Springs. So that'll provide that travel time reliability all the way to Empire when the Mountain Express lane is open during those peak travel times. We're also adding a resilient component, which is constructing a missing 2-lane frontage road connection from the bottom of Floyd Hill, connecting that into County Road 314 at the Hidden Valley Central City Parkway. When I-70 gets shut down, which happens quite frequently, I believe it happened last weekend, or this last week because of the snow, that provides an alternate route to go around I-70 for traveling public emergency response. So that's a great benefit to the project. We are also adding a new connection as part of the Floyd Hill from the bottom of Floyd Hill in the eastbound direction. That's where US 6 is at the bottom. And then we're carrying that up Floyd Hill because it's a 7% grade, so trucks will never get up to speed up that hill. And then dropping that lane once we get to the top of Floyd Hill so trucks can merge safely into traffic. That'll be a benefit in the eastbound direction. We're improving traffic flow at interchanges and intersections through there with improvements. Some have already been done. We'll highlight those here in just a second. And then a lot of the safety improvements. If you drive there today, it's a winding canyon, limited sight distance, 45-mile-an-hour curves that nobody drives 45 miles an hour through there. So we're bringing everything up to a 55-mile-an-hour design speed with standard shoulders throughout. We are also adding multimodal benefits as part of the project. We're improving the Clear Creek Greenway Trail. That's a trail that's just adjacent to Clear Creek. Through the project, we're reconstructing that 10-foot wide in concrete up to ADA standards. And then some of the additional benefits of the project is enhancing wildlife connectivity. Those of you that were on the bus tour, you got to see the Genesee Wildlife Crossing, which is complete. We've also installed over 4 miles, 2 miles each way of wildlife fencing in the corridor to reduce those animal vehicle conflicts and reduce crashes in the area. We also have 2 permanent air quality monitors installed as part of the project, one upstream in Idaho Springs, one downstream at the very eastern end of the project. You can go on the website, look real time at air quality on the project as part of Senate Bill 260. Next slide, please. So these are some of the renderings of the project through there. The one on the left is area in our central section of the project. So bottom of Floyd Hill, in between there, and then Central City Parkway. And then you can also see that frontage road connection. I-70 today follows where that frontage road that you see on the bottom of the screen is. And so as part of flattening out the curves and providing those safety benefits, we're crossing over Clear Creek and really straightening out I-70 to provide a lot of safety benefits through there. And then on the right is a rendering at the bottom of Floyd Hill. This is looking to the southwest from the bottom of Floyd Hill into the screen. On the left side of the screen is back to Denver. To the right is up to the Eisenhower Tunnel. And that highlights our over mile-long viaduct structure that we're creating as part of the project. You know, and pictures don't always do it justice. That structure there is over 100 feet high at its highest point there, middle left of the screen. Next slide, please. So talk about the achievements. You know, we've been in construction for over 1.5 years. We've completed rock scaling and rock blasting in the east section of the project, made a whole lot of progress, moving I-70 into the mountainside on the eastern end of the project. Now we're working in the median. We've completed over 17 rock blasts in the central and west sections of the project. That's 17 of anticipated over 200 total. We've installed over 5,600 linear feet of drainage pipe as part of the project. One of the things I love highlighting is the shotcrete walls that we've created as part of the project. That's on our eastern section that's into the mountainside. So we have what's called soil nail retaining walls, but then on the facade of it, we've done a sculpted stained shotcrete that if you're driving through there, it looks like rock. It is phenomenal. The artist that we had do that was great. It was amazing what you could do with a trowel and make it look like the surrounding rock. So I think that was a big benefit on the project. I highlighted the deer fencing that is currently completed through there, which is great. So we're seeing that benefit already in both directions of I-70. We've also constructed 5.5 lane miles of permanent roadway on the project. So if you've driven through there since last fall when we switched traffic, you will be on new sections of pavement as you go up Floyd Hill through there. And so now we're working in the median to get that done. We're hoping to see a lot of big benefits in the east section with that, hopefully wrapping up this summer. We're ahead of schedule on our east section through there. One of the other things to really highlight, as part of that Greenway Trail that I mentioned, construction caused us to shut that down for several years to complete the project. But working closely with our stakeholders and feedback from the bicycle community and others, we have implemented an on-demand courtesy shuttle April through September for folks that are traveling through there on bike or walking. We actually see a lot of people going cross country on a bike. So it's been a great service to implement. It's on demand. There's a telephone number at the bottom of the hill you call, pick you up, drive you safely through there. That way we avoid anybody trying to get on I-70 to make it through there on a bike or walking. Next slide, please. Just some more pictures to really highlight a lot of excavations going on up there. The picture on the far left is that saddle cut where we're straightening out I-70 through there. So we're removing over 500,000 cubic yards of material as part of the project. And so, and it's not easy material either up there in the mountains. It's solid granite. So that's what you see in the middle of the picture there is one of the rock blasts that we had in our west section. And then on the far right there, you see that new pavement that we have placed last fall that traffic is driving on today in our east section of the project. Next slide, please. One of the things that I think was a great benefit of Floyd Hill is the ability to get out there and do early projects. And we understand that there's always construction impacts when we go and improve roadways in Colorado. And so providing a benefit, whether that's an I-70 in Genesee Wildlife Underpass, that's one of the highest vehicle wildlife collision corridors on the entire stretch of I-70 in the mountain corridor. And so to have that improvement and to see wildlife use that is fantastic to reduce those crashes through there. Also for the community up there and folks traveling US 40, 2 roundabouts, one on US 40 at Homestead and one on US 40 at County Road 65 are complete. We've gotten great feedback about the improvements to that to really provide benefit for folks traveling through there. And then also the I-70 El Rancho Pegasus shuttle stop is nearly complete. The shade structure has been installed, and I think they're working on getting lighting on and a few more details. And then the fairly newly implemented Pegasus shuttle can stop there at a park and ride. So it's great to see those projects, the benefits already being seen as part of the Floyd Hill umbrella through there. Next slide, please. So now we've been tracking the project costs as we go through, Floyd Hill's being delivered in a method called CMGC, Construction Manager General Contractor. And so one of the benefits to that is we price the project out as we go through. We price it out at different milestones, 30% design, 60% design, 90% design. And then we have 3 shots at negotiating a price to move forward into construction. We've been successful at 3 times. And for all 3 packages that we have into construction, with the 4th one coming up here in the end of March. The budget was initially set in 2020, and it was estimated that the project was going to cost $700 million based on 20% conceptual design. We did apply for a US DOT infra grant as part of the IIJA, and we were successful in 2022, so that was fantastic. So that increased our project budget up to $800 million. But of course, as you really progress in design on the project, more details become known. You know, from a conceptual perspective, especially in the mountain environment, it's challenging to really understand all the little nuances and all the pieces of design that are needed to design a project such as Floyd Hill. And so as we get to those big milestones in design, those 30, 60, 90% design, we know more. We know we start to have quantities and start to really understand the design. And so with that, in addition to a lot of the industry-faced cost pressures that we've seen material costs rise, which Floyd Hill is not immune to. You know, we see that across the state for different projects and probably across country as a whole as well. So when we started pricing it out at 30%, we started to see that we were above where we needed to be. So then we sharpened our pencils. We went back and we looked at everywhere that we could find cost savings. What refinements could we do? We had a base scope mentality. What is the base scope to deliver the project goals to meet all of that? In anything that did not meet the project goals in a base scope was essentially cut. We identified over $140 million in savings from 30% design, which I think is a huge win for the project team. Now, that being said, we're still above the initial estimate in 2020. The latest cost estimate that we have with our final package at 90% design, the whole Floyd Hill umbrella, including early projects, design, right-of-way, construction, is now sitting at $905 million. So the discussion today is really to find a way to fully fund the project and keep construction moving forward so that we can hit those big milestone dates of seeing the improvements on eastbound I-70 at the end of 27 and westbound I-70 at the end of 2028. Next slide, please. So this is just to highlight some of the cost pressures that we've seen since 2020. And this is just taking some of the major items of work on Floyd Hill. What does it take to deliver Floyd Hill? Well, it takes lots of steel, lots of concrete, and asphalt. And so those are some of the big ticket items. And I just wanted to highlight this. This is straight from cost data, historical cost data at CDOT, across projects as a whole in the state. You know, steel back in 2020, we were seeing it $1.22 a pound. You know, the cost data from 2023 is $2.16 a pound. Structural concrete went up by 20%, asphalt by 35%. And those are the headwinds that I think Floyd Hill is facing through here. You know, there's a lot that's changed since 2020. We saw disturbances in the supply chain, labor costs have increased. You know, the initial 2020 estimate anticipated escalation rate at 2.5%. In looking in hindsight, you know, nobody had a crystal ball back then, so they couldn't predict what happened, but that didn't come true from 2020 to 2025. And so this is just kind of an example of where we're at on the project, and some of the challenges that we face, in addition to, you know, discovering more more is known about the project. So the two go hand in hand. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Piper to talk about some of the CTIO challenges that we've faced as well.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt. So, Kurt's memo did a pretty good job of, there was a summary funding table there on sort of the current project budget. And on there, we assumed that CTIO would be contributing $100 million through a toll revenue backed loan. So this is similar to other projects where we have gone out to secure toll revenue backed loans, whether through TIFIA, which is a federal government loan program. We did that on C470. We just recently closed a $501 million TIFIA loan of Fry 25 North. So this is sort of a mechanism that CTIO has used successfully on previous projects. So if you looked at Kurt's budget summary table, you saw that there was an assumption there based on what they were constructing. Kurt mentioned as part of the overview of the project that they are constructing a third westbound tolled express lane that's going to operate as a full-time lane, and it's going to connect into existing mountain express lanes that we have running up there. We have one that runs eastbound that's been open from basically the end of 2015 to the beginning of 2016, and then a westbound lane which just opened several years ago. So we assumed we were going, when we've been working on going out to secure a TIFIA loan, which would pledge, and there's a bullet point on here on the slide about that, would assume both the new revenue that we'd be generating from the Floyd Hill lane, plus the existing toll revenue that CTIO is already collecting on those peak period shoulder lanes, which are really shoulders that we operate during peak times to help relieve congestion. So a little bit more on kind of the peak lanes and sort of their role here. As I mentioned, those are really shoulders that we are allowed to open during peak times to relieve congestion. And we have a memorandum of understanding that governs how those shoulders are able to operate as lanes. And it's a third-party agreement between CTIO, CDOT, and FHWA. So the MOU itself is fairly short, but it does lay out operational limitations of those existing express lanes. We have days and hours caps, so we can only be open for a certain number of days, certain number of hours during our operating year. The MOU also states that those lanes will cease operations in 2035 unless they're modified by a different project. So as Kurt mentioned, the current Floyd Hill project doesn't touch these existing Mexel lanes. So they're not integrated as part of the overall Floyd Hill project. They will kind of connect into it, but they're not being modified as part of this current Floyd Hill effort that Kurt just outlined. So really, we're running into a conflict between the 2035 cessation date of those existing peak lanes and the term of the loan that we're going out to secure, which is 30 years. So we have been in discussions with TIFIA on how to potentially resolve this. And CTIO is going to have to go back and sort of retool its financing capacity based on the assumption that we do not have those peak period shoulder lane revenues past 2035. So if you saw on that table, that cuts down our proposed funding amount right now to an assumed $80 million of financing, just because we can't assume that that Mexel revenue will be there as a source to repay the loan past 2035. So we are actively working to try to find solutions. I didn't like coming to Kurt to tell him that I didn't have as much money as I thought for his project. But we really are right now looking at all avenues on how this is going to impact the schedule for the project and when they need the funding. We are working on refining our modeling. Right now, the 80 million is a back of the napkin because we haven't done a deeper dive into the financial model, but we are actively working on those things. So right now, our current assumption of what CTIO will bring to the table as far as toll revenue backed financing is $80 million in financing. So just to dive a little deeper on the CTIO piece, I wanted to make it clear why his budget table was showing a reduction in our current assumed contribution. But happy to answer any questions on the CTIO role in this project specifically.
All right. Thanks, Piper. Next slide. So as you can tell, we've had a lot of deep dialogue on how to fully fund the project, as Kurt mentioned on a prior slide, and we are rapidly trying to come to some really creative solutions, which I'd like to propose to you today, as we're asking you tomorrow to take action on resolution number 10. And the reason for kind of the quick turn on this is to construction moving with our existing summer window of construction season, as well as be able to really make some movement with escalations. We can, keep moving with our current pricing. So I'm going to step through the table. This is also in your packet. Just kind of go through the columns that we've proposed. So we have our existing 10-year plan strategic funds, and currently in the plan, we have $340 million. Through kind of this table in the next slide as well, I'm going to talk about a funding difference of $40 million that we're asking to be able to move forward. Hey, Herman, I'm just going to check with you. I keep getting a warning I have a low bandwidth. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there was one point where you paused just for 5 or 10 seconds, but otherwise it's been good.
Okay, just flag me if I keep getting an unstable network connection.
All right.
Okay, so that first line is really looking at our existing 10-year plan strategic funds. The second line is looking at our bridge and tunnel enterprise funds, previously identified funding amount $260, and then based on the project components and the elements that are eligible for BTE funds, we're looking at a proposed funding amount of $40 million additional. So that brings the BTE funding total to 300, and obviously that would be approved hopefully by the BTE board in a future action. And then, as Piper mentioned and discussed in detail, originally we had assumed $100 million from CTIO, TIFIA, based on some, further understanding of the project. We're looking at a little bit of a drop in funding on that because of the MOU arrangement. So I'll dive into a little detail on the next slide. And then we were really successful and excited about the infra grant. We've celebrated that several times out in the field with Secretary of Transportation that came to visit, one of the largest grants that we've gotten here at CDOT for $100 million. The HSIP funding, which is a pool of safety funds. So we are looking at a $5 million difference in HSIP funding. This project, in addition to the line below, faster safety mitigation, this project is a huge safety improvement on the corridor for the reasons that Kurt mentioned, really softening out the curves, bringing the speeds and the designs kind of into alignment, adding shoulders, replacing aging infrastructure. So really, this project could have qualified for a lot more. We took a really hard look, and 10 felt like the right amount to put for this point in time. And then the regional priority projects, that's our RPP funds. Those are regional discretionary funds. Due to some grants that were unsuccessful and a devolution that we were kind of saving up some money for, we were able to bring forward $30 million of RPP to really try and make the Floyd Hill project whole. So this table really talks kind of about the higher level funding, including the regional contribution. And you'll see at the bottom then that funding difference amount is $100 million that we're looking for. And with our proposed plan, we come up with that. So on the next slide, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the 10-year plan strategic funds that we're looking at moving some dollars around. So if you could move to the next slide. Thank you. So recommended solution for our 10-year plan funding. As we mentioned, so the top line is the I-70 West Floyd Hill. As Kurt mentioned, that was Floyd Hill plus 2 roundabout projects, a wildlife crossing, and a transit hub. So there is the large Floyd Hill picture that's included with that. So what we're looking to do is to backfill the shortfall, and the $40 million that's in the next column is the 10-year plan funds that I want to dive into kind of our proposed approach for those. We spent a lot of time, very detailed discussions with project teams, with Jeff, and with our executive management team, really making sure we had a solid approach based on project status for the projects in our plan, and what would happen, if we're moving some money around. So essentially with the 10-year plan, what happens over time is that some projects are using the dollars in real time as they're allocated to them, and some projects are moving slower than we thought, some are moving faster than we thought. But essentially those that are moving a little bit slower than we thought leave potential revenue on the table that we can access. So the first one I want to talk about is I-25 interchange reconstruction at Spear Boulevard. So currently in the 10-year plan, we have $15 million sitting in the fiscal year 19 to 26 period. That project is currently in a NEPA stage. It's going through alternatives analysis. We're working quickly to bring the alternative screening down to one acceptable alternative by many of our stakeholders. And so as a result, that project is not going to tap into the full $15 million by fiscal year 26, which is essentially next year. Our proposal is to move or advance $10 million from that project and put that toward the Floyd Hill allocation. So you'll see kind of that shifting, the reallocation of the funds of 10 million up into that 40 million line item for Floyd Hill. It still leaves that project with $5 million, which is ample capacity for them to continue NEPA and alternative screening. The other projects that we took a really hard look at kind of landed us with, they're along the same corridor as I-70 Floyd Hill, and they have some out year capacity that we need to do a little bit of deeper scoping on both I-70 and Kipling and the I-70 climbing lane from Bakerville. So starting with I-70 Kipling, they have $2.5 million currently in the phase for fiscal year 19 to 26 in that project. That is ample funding for the process that we're going through right now, which is just kind of re-looking at the design of the interchange, looking at some changed conditions due to right-of-way. The other $27 million that they have is sitting in the out years of the plan. So what we're looking to do is move some of those out year dollars from 27 plus to the current years to help with the Floyd Hill gap. And we're feeling like we will, I-70 Kipling is a strong project in the next reiteration of the 10-year plan. And when we have our allocation for 27 plus, we would be able to kind of backfill the funds that Floyd Hill has essentially borrowed from I-70 Kipling in those out years. The other project, I-70 climbing lane, is very similar approach to I-70 Kipling. It has some dollars due to some major scoping and better understanding of that project since the original culmination of the plan. That project is a lot larger in scope and scale than we originally anticipated. So it will, it needs some additional refinement if it moves into the next kind of version of the 10-year plan. So what we're looking at doing is borrowing, again, money from 15 million from the out years of that project and moving those dollars from the out years to the current year of Floyd Hill. So with 10 million from 23rd and Spear, 15 I-70 Kipling, 15 I-70 climbing lane, that gets us the 40 million that we need from the 10-year plan allocations. So those out year dollars, the 27 plus dollars, we've been working with Jeff and Darius to really understand the fiscal constraint of those out years of the 10-year plan. And we feel confident that we would be able to kind of bring those dollars back to the table in the 27 plus timeframe when those projects really need those dollars. And after some really good rescoping has done to better define those. So that is our proposed funding plan, how we want to make sure we help Kurt get to the end of Floyd Hill, finish that project in a timely manner for the traveling public. So I'm guessing there are probably questions, so I can channel those to Kurt or Piper or Jeff. We're all here to address questions.
All right, any questions? Rick, he's not his virtual hand, but his actual hand's up, so. Rick, you're muted still, though.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, and thank you, Chairman, for recognizing the manual hand. First off, let me say a couple things. The progress on this project is extraordinary. And I travel back and forth on a frequent basis. And I'm just, I note every time that, oh, look, they did X. And I'm amazed by it. So let's begin with that. Two, the creative look at how to finance this gap is impressive. And it's clearly the group here at CDOT put their heads together and said, how do we fix this problem? I've got a number of concerns. Now let me just put one out, which was, I think about a year ago, Jessica, you and Senator Roberts and I and the Speaker of the House were up on the project, and I asked directly to the project manager for the contracting firm, did he see any budgetary restraints? And that could we expect, some kind of supplemental? And he said at that time he was comfortable with the budget. Now, that may have been a very good political response to a commissioner. I get that. Probably would have done the same. But question, what has changed in that period? That perhaps that he was unaware of the cost estimates or unwilling to effectively inform us? Or is there something that has occurred within the last 9 months to a year that has particularly precipitated this cost? And that's question number one, increase.
All right, Kurt, I'm going to pass that one to you. I know you have a couple notes in the memo that have talked about some of the project changes, but do you want to highlight a couple of the kind of larger scale things that have happened over the past year?
Absolutely. And thank you, Commissioner Ritter, and thanks for coming up, touring the project and the kind words. Do appreciate that from my perspective.
You guys are
Yes.
great. I mean, I think this is one of the most exciting projects in America going on. And when we're finished with this, we're all going to look back and really be proud. So I just want to make it good, but I need to get answers.
Yes. And so I believe when you were on the project, we were still going off of our 30% pricing. And so we were actively looking, when I say base scope mentality, what I really want to highlight is we did not add scope to the project. We looked at what the bare minimum scope is to deliver the project goals that were set forth in the environmental documents and the planning process of the project. So that's a very important thing to highlight, that there was no added scope. We kept looking at ways to refine. And so one of the things as we price stuff through, we have two estimates. We have our contractor's estimate, and then we have our CDOT estimate, our independent cost estimate, and we don't share that data with our contractors up there because we want to continue to negotiate
You have to be
through
independent,
and get a fair price on the project. And so while we knew that there was, cost escalation and concerns with the budget, we knew that there were lots of opportunities to continue to refine. And we identified a lot, and a lot of them came to light. We saved over $140 million from where we were at 30%. But, I don't think we had all of the information to really share at that time to know where we were at, because we were actively going through this, look at every component of the project to try and get it down as low as we potentially could for the budget. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, from my just quick analysis, and I'll turn to my friend Commissioner Adams, who has a better brain for this than I do. It would seem that what we have here is about call it 20% increase in the cost of the project over a 7-year period, which, given inflation, has been probably at 30 to 35%, suggested that your 140 runs about 15%. So basically what you're looking at is an efficiency being able to reduce, but ultimately inflation just absolutely overrode you. Is that a quick assessment?
We did. And that is a very fair and great assessment. We didn't even look at inflation nationally. We looked at what did it do to actual CDOT bid items? What did it do to the projects in the state? And in Floyd Hill's case, that accounts for $170 million of, inflation over and above the 2.5% that was initially estimated in 2020.
Yeah, we all wished it had been 2.5%.
Me too.
Quick question then. That drives really the fundamental, and it's not a question that you're going to be able to answer per se, but given the potential tariffs, particularly on steel, that would be incoming of close to 25%. How do you expect, I guess the real question is, do we expect that you'll be coming back to us for an additional sum in a year because of these potential tariff increases in the cost of products? I mean, what percentage of these products are made in what is commonly known as China, or even Ukraine? I just, I fear that, we approve this, and I think we absolutely should, but I'm asking you for your crystal ball here.
Great questions, and I'll give you the insight the best that I have. So, all steel on Floyd Hill is under the Buy America, so that it is American steel. But when you have tariffs and then with steel that comes from other countries and such, it has an effect on the market as a whole because it just that's the way that it works. That being said, for Floyd Hill, we have the steel price locked in. So the supplier that if we move forward with this today, if the project gets delayed because we can't move forward, then it's
all done. Bets are off.
All out. But the steel price that we have today is locked in. A lot of the things we talk about for Floyd Hill is, in CMGC, risk. Where is the risk? I don't see the risk in the steel. Some of the other places with the concrete, we were seeing suppliers put 10% escalation on it. And in those cases, we don't have a crystal ball, but it's probably in CDOT's best interest to maybe take some of that to say, we don't think it's going to be 10% year over year for concrete. And so we did that. We didn't do that in the case of steel, but I don't believe that with the tariffs in that, especially for the steel, that's a big risk for the project because those prices are pretty well locked in right now with all of the suppliers if we continue down the path that we're going.
Okay, and I'll ask one final question, and this will be directed to Piper. If there's any way that we can remove the caps on the express lanes such that, for instance, they're open Thursday afternoons or greater opportunities. I realize we have agreement with the FTHA, but given the new administration, maybe they're more open to deregulating some of this, shall we say.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, Commissioner Ritter. We actually have successfully finished working with Clear Creek County and some of the stakeholders to increase the amount of hours and days that we're able to be open. We're kind of in the final process of working with the county on their 1041 permit process to kind of update the operations for that. So we have been successful in moving the needle on the amount of hours and days that we can open. Where we have a lot less flexibility and it's going to take more work is that 2035 date. And that's really what's driving the impact to the borrowing. The good news is, we are going to be able to be open during more periods of congestion, which we are seeing on Wednesdays, on Thursdays, to your point. So when we finish, executing this new MOU with the new, expanded hours and days, I'll certainly update the commission. But the 2035 date is kind of immovable at this moment in time. And that's really what's driving the change as it relates to the Floyd Hill funding.
Okay, so regardless of the additional hours, it doesn't bring in sufficient revenue to minimize the sort of impact on the 80 versus $100 million contribution.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
All right, one final comment. Any further delivery of this presentation to the feds, I suggest taking Pete Buttigieg's face out of the presentation, given their receptivity to that fine man.
Thank you, Commissioner Ritter. Next, Commissioner Cook.
Yeah, thank you. I'd echo many of the compliments. I guess I have one request for Jessica and a question or two for Kurt. Do you want me to go with Kurt first, Jessica?
I'll give Kurt a break and I'll take one.
Okay. We've got NEPA type work underway for the Spear Boulevard and 23rd Avenue work. So that means that we're engaging with stakeholders and neighbors and things like that. But it's been 10 years since the PEL was done, I think, on Kipling. And my request is for outreach to those folks, especially if we're going to be rethinking what we're doing there, kind of hanging in that period of time. So some kind of outreach would be wonderful if we could do that to the folks, the stakeholders and the property owners, et cetera, whoever you deem appropriate. The second one for whoever, how does the express lane work? Does that just merge into Mexel, or how is that connection handled, I guess is what I'm wondering.
Great question, Commissioner, and I can handle that one. And so, of course, Mexel will be closed at certain points in the Floyd Hill Express Lane is 24/7. So there will be times that Floyd Hill Express Lane will be open and Mexel will be closed. That being said, we have to provide safe egress for when Mexel's closed to be able to get back out of the Floyd Hill Express Lane. So if you can imagine in the future when you're driving westbound on I-70, you go through the Veterans Memorial tunnels, and then once you get a little past there, you have the option to merge left into the Mountain Express lane or merge right back into the two general purpose lanes. So you will have a length, a very good length to make that decision whether to merge back into traffic or merge into the Mountain Express lane when it's open. When it's closed, then you have to merge back into the general purpose lanes. And that will also be the merge point for the exit 241 to Idaho Springs.
Okay. And and I wanted to pass along a compliment. Jeff Tagg, Mike Raber from Bike Jeffco is very engaged on your project. And evidently the Clear Creek Greenway, from how he recounts it, draws people from all over the world. And they're very appreciative of the fact that you've made the shuttle available to them. So I just wanted to add that particular compliment to you. And also then to thank Jessica for her earlier phone call today on very short notice. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cook. Next, we have Commissioner Parsons.
Yeah, thank you. Jessica, thank you for that overview. It's really helpful. I apologize if you've already answered this elsewhere, but with the infra grant, has that already been, I know it's been awarded, but do we have that in hand, or is there any risk of us losing that federal funding with the change in administration?
Yeah, Kurt, do you want to take that one? I think you've been working closely with the business office on status and.
So I think that one's a hard one for me. I might be getting out of my wheelhouse a little bit. I will say we have obligated 20 million of the 100 million in our third package. So that is currently obligated and we're spending it. And according to conversations that I have with FHWA, that is not going to stop, at least based on the information that we had as of the last week. The second part to that is at the end of March, the intent is to obligate $80 million of that federal grant to the last package of Floyd Hill. And I cannot speak to if we will get the authorization to do that. I have talked to FHWA and I think there might be some concerns that we will not be able to obligate that in the time that we need it. And so I think there's still some questions surrounding obligating it. We do have a grant agreement in place for the $100 million, but we don't have $80 million obligated yet for that last package.
Thank you, Commissioner Parsons. And Jeff, you had your hand up for a bit there.
Yeah, I was just going to comment, with respect to federal funding in general, what we've seen at CDOT is that we have not had any interruption in our ability to obligate or receive reimbursement for ongoing formula funds or for grants that are already executed. There's one program that is not the case, but not a funding stream that's associated with this project. So I think where we've had concerns with grants, it's on federal grants where we maybe have been awarded but have not had an executed contract yet. So I think in this case that is the significant milestone that's in place. So I don't think I think there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think to this point the federal funds that are associated with this project are federal funds that we've seen to continue to flow as expected.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Oh, thank you for that clarification. Are there any other comments or questions? All right. Thank you. Thank you, team. Thank you, Jessica, for that excellent presentation. We appreciate it. And this will be teed up for consideration tomorrow, as I understand it, for action by the Transportation Commission. So thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. That takes us to the next presentation, which is our budget workshop. And that is listed as Jeff Sudmeyer and Bethany Nichols and Julie Constant.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think we will start off with the fiscal year 25 budget supplement. And then when we've concluded that, we'll move on to the fiscal year 26 draft fiscal year 26 budget. The main item I wanted to highlight from the budget supplement that we'll be requesting your approval of tomorrow is a request from Region 5 for $4.1 million in TC contingency reserve funds to complete repairs to a bridge on State Highway 141 in Region 5. Heavy rains in August resulted in scour and debris, which removed the south abutment embankment and resulted in the temporary closure of the bridge. They've since completed a temporary repair, but the contingency funding is now being requested in order to complete a permanent repair in advance of spring runoff. Julie Constant from Region 5 is on, so I wanted to give Julie, with your permission, give Julie an opportunity to provide any additional detail on that request or answer any questions.
Go ahead,
Yep.
Julie.
Oh, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, you can. Okay.
Yeah.
So the request, Jeff summarized it very well. The only other thing I would add on this request is that we are requesting federal reimbursement, and in the process of working through that, the governor's office did declare it an emergency as they tagged it on to some other flooding that had happened in the area. So hopefully we'll be successful with that to get some federal reimbursement back into the program. And that's really all I had to add.
And thanks for mentioning that, Julie, because to that point, if we are successful in receiving federal reimbursement, then I think you might actually see those contingency funds come back to you at a later date. So if there aren't any other questions for Julie, I'll just briefly summarize the other items in the budget supplement request. We have 3 other items, all of which relate to the reallocation of 10-year plan funds. One is a request from Region 1 and DTR to reallocate $2.2 million in funds from the Castle Rock Mobility Hub project to the Lone Tree Mobility Hub project in order to fund a shortfall after bid prices came in high. They can do this because the Castle Rock Mobility Hub is not ready to move forward at this point. It's still in the planning phase. The second request we actually just discussed as part of the Floyd Hill workshop. There's actually 2 different approval actions related to Floyd Hill. I believe those are resolution. One is the budget supplement. One is a separate resolution that involves the advancement of those fiscal year 27 funds. So the part in the budget supplement is the reallocation of $10 million in this current 10-year plan period from the I-25 interchange reconstruction at Spear and 23rd to Floyd Hill. So that piece of that is in the budget supplement. And then the third request related to the 10-year plan is a request from Region 3 to utilize 19 million in savings from 3 completed projects to fund phases 1 and 2 of the I-70 exit 203 project. That will effectively advance the second phase of that project from the fiscal year 27 plus period, so that both phases can be advertised and delivered as a single project. So just wanted to briefly mention those other items in the supplement. Happy to take any questions. Otherwise, we'll be back to request your approval on that supplement tomorrow.
Any questions on it? Looks good, Jeff. Go ahead.
All right. If no questions, then we will move from fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 26. And Bethany and I are going to tag team on this presentation, but I'm going to hand it to Bethany because she's going to start us off.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Jeff. All right, so just to recap where we're at in the process, we brought the FY26 draft budget back in November for approval, and now we're at the point of bringing you the proposed final budget for review. So let me see if I can advance the slides here. There. All right. So for agenda, I'm going to go over a few different things, and we're going to kind of tag team a little bit. So I'll walk through sources and uses, look at the final budget allocation plan, including the narrative appendices, the revenue allocation plan or the one sheet, and the spending plan. I'm going to hand it off to Jeff to kind of provide an update on the legislative budget amendment. So he'll walk through kind of what's been happening there and where we're at in that process, and some changes from the proposed budget. And then I will talk about decision items, go through timeline and next steps. Okay, so first I have an overview of projected revenues for the FY26 final budget. So the last time you saw this chart was back in November with the adoption of the final proposed budget. In comparison to the last time we presented this, we've made updates based on the latest quarterly revenue update, which we shared last month. And then we've also made updates based on some changes to our legislative decision items. So those are the two things that have changed. And as I go, I'll kind of flag some of those items specifically, but I will ask if you don't mind holding questions related to the legislative changes, because we do have a bunch of slides devoted to explaining that in depth. So you will have a chance to ask specifics when we get to those. But overall, the total revenue available for allocation in the FY26 budget for CDOT and the enterprises is $2.2 billion. So first we have federal funding. We're anticipating $803.3 million, or about 36% of our revenues coming from federal funding. This has not changed significantly since we presented the proposal back in November. For the Highway User Tax Fund, which includes fuel taxes and fees, vehicle registration, faster fees, retail delivery fees, we're forecasting $660.8 million. This is about $30 million higher than the proposed budget. So it includes a reduction of about 12.8 based on the revenue forecast, which if you'll remember last month, we mentioned just due to how actuals were coming in, we adjusted the forecast downward a little bit. And then it also includes about a $43.3 million increase due to some changes with faster fees that Jeff will walk through in a later slide. We have updated the forecasts for the different enterprises. So we updated the Bridge and Tunnel enterprise forecast, bringing them to $181.4 million, which is just a slight decrease over the proposed budget. For CTIO, we have them at $238.2 million, which is a bit higher, almost $53 million higher. And that's just based on the updated forecast that we received from CTIO. They're planning for additional revenues based on their forecasts. So for other state funds, we're forecasting $277.5 million. So this includes aviation fuel taxes, appropriated special programs, and then the 3 other enterprises. So clean transit, non-attainment, and clean fuels, along with some miscellaneous revenue. And this category just had a small adjustment due to some minor changes in the aeronautics revenue forecast. And then finally, for revenues resulting from legislative initiatives, we're forecasting 43.5 million, which is about 25 million lower than what we presented in November. And again, we'll go through that in more detail later on. Okay, looking at the uses side of this, taking that 2.2 billion and moving to look at what programs that those funds will be allocated to. First, we have multimodal services making up about 9% of the budget at 193.2 million. Next, administration and agency operations. So also about 9%, 202 million. So this includes the appropriated administration budget along with agency operations and project initiatives. So also 9% for other programs, debt service and contingency funding. So about 200 million. This includes kind of state safety education, planning and research, the state infrastructure bank, or debt service, and kind of any new revenues going into the contingency and program reserve funds. Capital construction, of course, the largest portion of funds are allocated there at about 36.5% or 805 million, including asset management, safety programs, 10-year plan projects, and the regional priority program. Maintenance and operations is our second largest allocation, about 20% or 431 million. And then finally, we have sub-allocated programs, which totals about 374 million or 17% of our total budget. Okay, so we have included all of these changes across the entire final budget allocation plan. So the narrative has been updated to reflect these figures, as well as the revenue allocation plan or the one sheet. These are all linked in the packet and posted on the CDOT website. So as a reminder, there are multiple reports included with the entire budget. There's a spending plan that provides a forecast of anticipated expenditures. There's a listing of all open projects and unexpended project balances. There's a table showing all planned projects as well as the total construction budget. The plan also includes a report showing project indirects and construction engineering, and a CDOT personnel report. And we are now also including an update on the 10-year plan in the budget submission. So a lot of information there, and it's, again, all posted on our website. Okay, so looking a little closer at the one sheet, the revenue allocation plan, we have balanced using the most recent quarterly forecast, the December 2024 forecast. We've made those updates based on the proposals submitted with the governor's FY26 budget request, so those legislative pieces. And then, as we normally do, we've allocated flexible revenues in accordance with what the TC adopted in March of 2024 with any adjustments that we had to make to be able to balance. In flexible revenues, were automatically adjusted based on the revenue forecast. So you can see we have a total 2.2 billion in revenue allocated, including the 1,688.3 million for CDOT and the 516.4 million for transportation enterprises. Okay, looking at the spending plan, the FY26 spending plan provides a projection of anticipated expenditures within the fiscal year. So this report is organized within the same categories that are in the revenue allocation plan, but the lines tie to how we expend the funds. So you can see things like anticipated right-of-way acquisitions or CDOT staff salaries and benefits, contractor payments, and so forth. You might notice that we're still projecting higher expenditures than what we're allocating in annual revenue. And that's because we're still continuing to spend down one-time funding from previous years. So it still includes some remaining SB 267 COPs and transfers from Senate Bill 260, as well as a handful of other one-time sources. So all told, we're showing a projected expenditure of nearly 2.6 billion with 2.2 billion in revenue allocation. So if you take this information with the revenue allocation plan and also take a look at the cash memo, the monthly cash memo that's in the packet and the informational section, you'll be able to get a really good comprehensive picture of kind of the department's financial position. So So that's kind of a pretty quick look at where we're at with the FY26 budget. And then I'll go to this next slide and I'll kind of hand it over to Jeff to walk you through the legislative budget amendment.
Okay, thank you, Bethany. So in November, we reviewed CDOT decision items that were included in the governor's November 1 budget request. That included 2 proposals that would result in reductions to planned general fund transfers to CDOT, as well as a permanent reduction in the faster road safety surcharge. Since that time, we've worked closely with the state Office of State Planning and Budget to try to identify opportunities to reduce the scope of those reductions, while recognizing that the need hasn't changed significantly since fall. There remains a continued need across state agencies to identify reductions in order to balance the state budget. That said, I think we were able to work with OSPB to find ways that, as part of the overall broader package of budget reductions, that we think there are opportunities to propose a change to what was originally put forward for CDOT that would be less impactful than what was originally proposed. So to that end, in coordination with OSPB, the department submitted a budget amendment BA01 to the legislature on January 30 to modify the reductions that were originally proposed on November 1. This slide sort of summarizes overall the impact of that budget amendment. But in that budget amendment would reduce the impact of the original November 1 budget request by approximately 18 million in fiscal year 26 and 19 million in fiscal year 27. So we're sort of improving our outcomes by about 19 million this upcoming budget year and the next budget year, if that revised proposal moves forward. More significantly, though, I'd say it would also limit the reduction of the road safety surcharge to just those 2 fiscal years, instead of imposing that as a permanent reduction. So this table summarizes the modifications to the original 2 proposals in fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. And we'll walk through each of those elements in the subsequent slides, but just want to pause here to summarize. So the proposed reduction to the road safety surcharge, and you see that on your table here is R04, would be cut by about 2/3, going from about a $65 million annual impact and growing over time. So originally that would have been a $65 million a year impact to our road safety surcharge revenue in perpetuity. We are now looking at that reduction instead being about a $22 million impact, and only in fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. So you can see on that R04 line, the reduction, assumed reduction, going from about 65 million a year in 26 to about 22 million, and the same in fiscal year 27. Conversely, the proposed reduction to the planned $100 million general fund transfer in fiscal year 26 and 27 would be increased by 25 million a year. So that's that R03 line. So you can see there what would have been a $39 million reduction to what was originally a $100 million general fund transfer in fiscal year 26. That reduction increases by 25 million to 64 million in 26. And it increases by the same amount from 24.5 million to 49.5 million in fiscal year 27. However, I'll note that the original proposal was really intended to be net neutral on the general fund transfers, at least in nominal terms over time. So the original proposal increased general fund transfers in later years so as to be net neutral over the life of those general fund transfers. And so accordingly, this budget amendment increases those later transfers by an additional 50 million to offset the increased reductions in 26 and 27. So As noted, net result is about an $18 million improvement in fiscal year 26, about 19 million in fiscal year 27, plus with that additional 50 million in increased general fund transfers coming back to us in later years. I want to note that, Bethany hit on this, but we've updated the budget this month. All of what Bethany walked you through has been updated to reflect this modified proposal. Now, that being said, at this point, the Joint Budget Committee of the Legislature has not made any final decisions on CDOT's budget reduction proposals. And I would say it's likely we're not going to have certainty until later in the legislative session or potentially near the end of the legislative session. If something changes between now and March that we have updated information, we could consider making some additional changes to the budget before we bring it to you for approval in March. But I think more likely we'll be asking you to approve the draft budget as presented today, assuming this updated budget proposal. And then we'll have to wait and see what happens at the end of the legislative session, and if necessary, if this amended proposal does not move forward in exactly the form presented here, then we would come back to you in July at the start of the fiscal year to amend the budget to align with those legislative decisions. So let's go on, Bethany, to the next slide. I'm just going to kind of touch in a little bit more detail on each of the components that we just summarized on that prior slide. Again, here, this just shows you in more detail the changes to the general fund transfers between the original R03 proposal and the revised budget amendment BA01. As noted, the proposed reductions increase by 25 million in each of fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. But then you'll see that those amounts essentially come back in fiscal year 33, the last year of those planned general fund transfers, with that final year increasing by 50 million. Let's go on to the next slide, Bethany. So this next slide shows how this change to the proposal for general fund transfers is reflected in the budget this month. Of the planned general fund transfer, as outlined when we brought you the draft budget in November, 15 million of the general fund transfer is allocated to contingency, 10 million to Bustang, with the remainder of the general fund transfer allocated to the 10-year plan. After we updated the budget in November to reflect that initial proposed reduction, we were looking at about 120.9 million allocated to the 10-year plan. And that's actually, incidentally, that's not the 120.9 million you see in that final budget column, but rather that would be the sum of those 10-year plan amounts in the proposed budget. A 10-year plan, capital asset management, capital mobility, and multimodal. When we brought you the budget in November, we had 120.9 million represented on those three lines as our planned 10-year plan allocations. This month, those planned 10-year plan allocations are reduced by an additional 25 million to reflect the increased general fund reduction. You'll see that that's actually not a net 25 million on this slide. It's actually 24.1 million because we did have a slight increase in some flexible federal funds going to the 10-year plan. So while the impact here is a $25 million reduction to the 10-year plan, the positive to that is that we would assume then a commensurate increase in later years as those general fund transfers are pushed out. But moving on, I think now to the next slide, you will see that while we're seeing a $25 million further reduction to the 10-year plan, we're seeing a larger restoration of allocations to asset management and faster safety associated with this other component of the revised budget amendment. So looking at that R04, the proposed changes to the road safety surcharge, what was originally proposed was a permanent reduction of $11.10 to the road safety surcharge for all weight-based categories. In this revised budget amendment, we're proposing that this instead be limited to a $3.70 reduction in only fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. That results in the restoration of much of the reductions to the faster safety and asset management programs we had to make in the draft budget based on that original proposal. So allocations to faster allocations to asset management programs, which were originally 53.7 million, were reduced down to 27.6 million in November, and we've now brought those back up to about 44.9 million as a result of the reduced impacts associated with this revised proposal. The allocation of the faster safety program went from 80.5 million when we first started the 26 budget process down to 41.5 million in November. We've now, based on this revised proposal, been able to bring that number back up to about 67.4 million. So the net result of that is that from November, your faster allocations to asset management and faster safety went up about 43.2 million. All right, next slide, please. All right, I don't think I'll go through this in detail, but this basically just gives you the line item level of detail on that $43.2 million increase. So as we were able to restore much of what was previously reduced to faster safety and asset management, this just shows you at a program level where those funds were restored, totaling 43.2 million. All right, next slide. So this slide gives an overall summary of the line item changes, or I should say category level changes in some cases from the proposed budget that you brought in November. So again, asset management, faster safety, both of those programs seeing increases as a result of that revised budget reduction proposal. Going in the other direction, but to a lesser extent, we are seeing a reduction, further reduction to the 10-year plan allocations associated with an increase to the general fund reductions. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this is outlined in your memo. We do have some adjustments to the agency operations and administration lines that primarily are associated with common policies and final decision items related to salaries and benefits, and then also related to decision items that Bethany's going to walk you through. And then as a result of some of those final balancing actions, you also see an adjustment to the commission reserve funds line, which goes from about 18.4 million down to about 5.3 million. So I think with that, I'm going to hand it back to Bethany, but she's going to talk us through the last couple of slides on decision items, and then I think we can open it up to questions. So, Bethany.
Perfect. Yeah, we just have 2 slides left. So kind of switching gears and taking a look at our internal budget process. So during the FY26 budget building process, CDOT divisions and regions requested decision items. So it's, they're requests for funding that represent a significant change to a division's current program. So new or expanded programs or investments. So in accordance with Policy Directive 703, decision item requests of less than $1 million are reviewed and subject to approval by the EMT, while decision items of $1 million or greater are reviewed by the EMT and then forwarded to the commission for consideration, with that final approval, landing with the final annual budget allocation plan in March of 2024. So for this process this year, actually, we didn't end up with any decision items approved by the EMT that were in excess of $1 million that require additional approval. We did provide in the memo kind of informationally a look at a couple items that the EMT did approve, if you want to take a look at that. So we don't actually have too much to review there. Looking at timeline and next steps. So we do anticipate a few changes for the final budget prior to adoption next month. We are going to update the revenue allocation plan to include estimated roll forward budget for fiscal year 25. So that will give a complete picture of the budget that's available for planning and programming in FY26. So roll forward budget represents budget from a prior year that hasn't yet been committed to a project or expended from a cost center prior to the close of the fiscal year. In March, we'll return to request that you review and adopt the FY26 final annual budget allocation plan. So that would allow us by April 15th to submit it to the governor's office and the legislature, which is required by statute. And then by June 30th, the governor will sign his approval, and that will allow us to push the budget into the accounting system so that the funds are available for expenditure when the new fiscal year begins in July of 2025. And I think that is our final slide. So we can kind of open up and take any questions you have on anything we went over.
All right, first up, we've got Vice Chair Adams.
Well, first of all, Jeff and Bethany, I just want to tell you, I'm impressed. I'm impressed about the skillful, professional way that you guys have sorted through all of the puts and takes that you have to contend with and manage to stay on top of this. And I only have one question, just as a frame of reference, so that I can at least understand where you are on the asset management question. And that's because it looks to me on a couple of slides you had that basically we're about flat on one way of looking at it. But as I recall in a previous conversation, there was some comment that suggested that some of the coverage from an asset management standpoint is actually resides within our 10-year plan. And so I'm just trying to get some comfort that the amount of our asset management, which we all acknowledge that we were nowhere near where we wanted to be or thought we should be in terms of maintaining the assets as it stands. But I just wanted to get a fix and maybe reassurance that when I combine the total of what's visible to me in asset management from what you talk about, as well as what's embedded within the 10-year plan, that we are at least neutral to where we were in prior years, if not greater. Can you comment on that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. So it's a good question. I mean, so if we were to go back and look at the slide on faster and asset management, this revised proposal does largely restore sort of those ongoing asset management program levels. They are still down from where we are in November, but much less so than we were back in November. There is a little bit of a trade-off in this proposal that we're seeing. Those asset management and safety programs are less impacted, but we're seeing an increase to the impact on the 10-year plan. What I can say about the 10-year plan is that as right now we are in the process of funding that current slate of 10-year plan projects. And so we developed a list of projects based on a planning estimate, and we're allocating funds on an annual basis towards those projects. To date, we've been allocating funds in advance of projects needing them. So what I can say is what that means is that while there is a reduction to our allocation of 10-year plan projects, which does include some asset management type projects. I think the target when we developed that list was about 50% of those dollars to go to asset management. I am hoping that those projects will be able to continue without delay, because the actual spending is spread over multiple years and will continue into the future. So I guess maybe a simpler way to try to put that would be to say that there is an impact to our current allocation to 10-year plan projects. However, when I think you will see the current slate of projects move forward as planned, including those asset management projects. To the extent that there are impacts, what I think you will see is that when we get to that next phase of 10-year plan projects, we will potentially be planning slightly less in the next 4-year period than we would have otherwise. So hopefully that I'm not sure I did a great job of explaining that, but I think that the short of that is that I think I think you'll largely see your asset management programs restored close to their original level. We are seeing a reduction in the 10-year plan projects, but allocations. But again, I think that will mostly impact the next 4-year projects, less the current slate of projects.
Well, the only issue there, if I heard you correctly, and I appreciate your explanation, but it sounds to me like the net of it all is that we are going to sacrifice some of our asset management plan so that if we were ranked very poorly in the past, we probably aren't making much progress towards improving our position, if I heard you correctly.
Well, I think, there's no way around it that we still have reductions associated through these proposals, right? So they are less reductions than what we saw in November. I think but I think you're correct. At the end of the day, there are still impacts, there are still reductions. We're trying to mitigate that as best as we can. And I think as we move into the next update to the 10-year plan, I think you're going to see a very strong focus on asset management projects, recognizing that we need to continue to make progress in that area. And I don't think that's where we want to see the impacts, right? So I think we want to try to make sure that we can continue to maximize the funds available for asset management, just recognizing the level of need there.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments on this presentation? Jeff, thank you. Yeah, very complicated. I've gone over the material several times. Forgive me, I'm a lawyer, not a mathematician or a financial person, so I'm still struggling a little bit to make sure I understand it. But I think that I get it, that we're facing reductions, but we're working like crazy to try to mitigate what those reductions are, and that makes a ton of sense. Your responses to Vice Chair Adams, that because a significant portion of our 10-year plans pick up a good deal of that asset management issue, we'll see a greater focus, or a likely greater focus in that area, trying to hopefully not only maintain our current level, but do our best to increase it wherever possible. So I think that I've got that, but I'll keep listening to you as you go. So
I think that was well said, Chair. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I feel good that I got that far. Commissioner Stewart.
Thank you. I can't find my hand. I appreciate the hard work to backfill this. I have to say, it's so concerning to me, and I feel like I have to protest a little bit about these budget cut requests. At RTC, Regional Transportation Committee, at DRCOG this week, we looked at targets to reduce safety impacts, how to reduce vehicle crashes, and how to make safety a bigger priority. We've got a target in the future, and all those targets are kind of dependent on us having enough money put into budgets that do safety improvements, that build bridges, that reinforce bridges, and those kinds of things. And it's frustrating that while we look to these targets to reduce safety issues, loss of life, and severe crashes, bridge degradation, instead of moving forward as we should to put more money into these things, we're having to put less money into these things. And I understand the reason why, and I understand how we're trying to backfill it and use different small sections of the budget to offset these things. But I just have to protest a little bit that in a state like Colorado, where we have a good standard of living, where we have a lot of tourism dollars, where we have opportunities to find money for special projects we lack here, and it's something we've said for many, many years. I appreciate Jeff and Bethany working toward reducing that impact. And I'm not going to be here in the future years to see what that impact is, because it sounds like we'll be okay perhaps this year. Maybe next year there'll be a little bit more of an impact, but the future is not certain in this. And I don't know how we as a transportation commission, how we can make decisions to protect the monies that we need for these things. I'm not being rhetorical. I'm really meaning, I don't know how we make the decisions. But anyway, I do appreciate the guidance from the executive management team and from our, budget office. I just want to protest a little bit. Thanks. That's me. Done.
Protest noted, Commissioner Stewart. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? All right, and no action on this. We're actually going to tee that up with any further adjustments for the March meeting then, correct, Jeff?
Yes, that's correct. So again, we do have to request your approval of the budget in March to meet statutory deadlines for us to submit the budget in April. I think we're encouraged that we were able to put forward this revised proposal because again, while it does result in reductions, it is I think much more muted in impact. But most likely we won't have certainty on whether that is what ultimately happens through the legislature until later in the session. So we will do our best to keep you updated, and we will be back next month to request approval, whether we have certainty or not.
Thank you. And if I recall correctly, don't we have to reappear before the JBC for more figure setting conversations prior to the next meeting?
Yes. So yeah, thank you for commenting on that. We have I believe I think we're actually going to be back in front of the JBC a couple times in the next few weeks. One, to follow up on some questions actually on some of the other decision items we didn't discuss this week. I think that was the MMOF spending authority and Clean Transit Enterprise Spending Authority, and then I believe somewhere around the 12th, maybe 13th, I think we will be back. And I think the JBC will be going through what are called comebacks, which is kind of their follow-up on final decisions with departments. And so we'll see where we land at that point in time.
And that was the nature of my question, because I figured that we might hear some additional information that might require some other adjustments, but even that's not the final word. So I understand what you're saying. Okay. Thank you. Thank you to both you, Jeff, and Bethany, and your staff. I want to echo the comments. Just amazing work that you're trying to do. We can only do so much with the money that we've got, and we're trying our best to manage it as best we can to meet all of our statutory responsibilities and all of our responsibility to our citizens. It's just tougher and tougher, as Commissioner Stewart has pointed out, when the cost and need grow and the revenues shrink. That's a difficult position for any government to be in. So appreciate your hard work.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to the next item on the agenda, which is the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise Workshop with Patrick Kalinda and Katie Carlson. Patrick, I'll tee that up for you.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. So our workshop this month has two components. So the first is an overview of our planned 2025 bond transaction. Then we'll be following that up with an overview of BTE's final fiscal year 2026 budget. And this discussion will be augmenting the information provided earlier by Jeff and Bethany regarding the department-wide budget, and does a little bit of a deeper dive into the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise budget in particular. Next slide, please. So moving on to the first component of the workshop, we want to start by discussing the upcoming bond transaction. And really the purpose of today's workshop is twofold. So first and foremost, we want to update the board on the status of our planned bond transaction. This is primarily being driven by the Floyd Hill project, which you heard about earlier. So ultimately, our ability to provide the level of funding proposed in today's Floyd Hill workshop is contingent on this transaction moving forward. So as we look to execute, we want to obtain input on decision items related to the transaction prior to finalizing the bond documents over the next month, and then ultimately seeking your approval to move forward with the transaction in March. So really just looking for a head nod that we're moving in the right direction in terms of structuring decisions before we produce those bond documents and then ultimately come back to you next month. Next slide, please. So today's agenda, we'll begin with a presentation of our overall plan of finance, just as a refresher. I know we've touched on it a number of times over the past few years, but it's a good kind of intro or lead in to our next transaction. I want to touch on the status of that next planned new money transaction, proposed structuring, give the board a chance to weigh in on the options we're evaluating and decision items, and then provide a few other informational items. And then we want to review our most recent financial forecast with and without the planned transactions. And then we'll close with the discussion on timing and next steps. Next slide, please. So this provides an overview of our current plan of finance. Some background on how we got here. Several years ago, whenever the CDOT 10-year plan as we know it today was introduced, Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise evaluated its commitments to the 10-year plan. And ultimately, we determined that if all the projects included in the plan with BTE eligible scope were to progress on schedule, that the enterprise would have a funding gap of roughly $450 million to keep all of those projects on their current schedules. And then given the fluctuations we've seen in both project timing and cost estimates, we discussed some of the challenges we've seen relative to inflation and cost escalation earlier. In general, we've communicated to this group that roughly $400 to $500 million in financing would be required through as many as 3 transactions to make our portfolio whole. So when we set out and developed the plan of finance, our basic goals were to eliminate the funding gap that I mentioned, fund our strategic projects timely. So really we're prioritizing the timely completion of our projects over adjusting schedule to match with Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise funding resources. We want to maintain a positive Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise program cash flow. So typically you manage to a $25 million cash floor over a 4-year horizon. So typically we don't want to manage the program any tighter than that. And then ultimately we want to structure these financings with our pay-as-you-go program in mind. So given that Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise is our largest dedicated source of bridge and tunnel funding statewide, we want to make sure that there's adequate capacity to maintain our bridge and tunnel assets moving forward. So with respect to progress that we've made on our plan so far, we closed our first new money transaction in April of last year with the board's approval. That transaction generated roughly $164 million in project funds. $163 million of that has been budgeted, $50 million of it spent, and another $50 million of it encumbered in construction projects. We do expect that the majority of those funds from the first transaction will be spent down by the end of this construction season. So with our 2024 construction projects funded and behind us, looking forward to 2025, we're looking to talk to you about that next tranche of financing for our calendar year 2025 construction projects. I also wanted to make a note that as this group is aware, we did refund our outstanding Series 2010A Build America bonds in December of 2024. That transaction was executed. One of the goals of that was providing additional flexibility and capacity leading into this transaction. And as you recall, we were able to flatten and level the program's overall debt service profile, which we'll get back to that momentarily. Next slide, please. So we're now progressing through the planning stages for the second of these 3 financings. When we first talked leading into the Series 2024A transaction, we really had a myriad of different options in terms of how we structured the program and our debt service profile. So as we're moving through the plan of finance, our options are narrowing to some extent. So really the major decision item that we're looking at is the term of this transaction. So although we've considered a number of different terms, today we're planning to present you with two debt service structures with a 30-year term. And this is based on a few factors. So first, we're really looking to preserve our pay-as-you-go program capacity over the coming years. Again, just making sure we have a healthy annual pay-as-you-go program to meet our ongoing bridge and tunnel needs. Using a 30-year term also provides us a bit more capacity and flexibility for future financing initiatives should any future needs arise when comparing a 30-year term to a shorter term. And one thing we also look at is there any benefit in market conditions from a longer 30-year term and as compared to a shorter 15 or 20-year term? And based on current market conditions, and we have a relatively flat municipal yield curve right now, just to give you some context, if you compare a 20-year and a 30-year maturity, the difference between the two is only about 15 basis points. So a basis point is essentially a hundredth of a percent. So we're looking at 0.15%. So typically one thing we look for in a shorter term is more of a benefit from an interest rate perspective. And then if you look at this transaction or this planned transaction relative to past Bridge and Tunnel Enterprises debt issuances or our past debt issuances, we really have utilized this 30-year term in the past for similar reasons. So I also want to note that the scenarios we'll be providing you are sized to provide a project fund of $225 million for our upcoming calendar year 2025 construction projects. This is primarily, as I mentioned, driven by the Floyd Hill project. We anticipate bringing you a funding request of roughly $240 million for that project next month in conjunction with the request to move forward with this transaction. Would you mind moving back a slide, Jamie? Thank you. So again, that's the order of magnitude we're targeting, and really that's wrapped around the last construction package for Floyd Hill. And then both of the scenarios will present you assume principal amortization starting in 2029. So really delaying principal amortization a few years allows us to navigate a choke point in the program. So imagine that we have a very large amount of BTE eligible scope being delivered right now, flowing through our project pipeline. And so really the delivery of those projects is reaching a peak over the next 2 to 3 years. So delaying principal amortization allows us to essentially finance less to complete our current scope. And the other thing it does is provides us a bit of a balanced approach to paying down principal on our debt portfolio. So if you look back at the structuring of our debt dating back to 2010, generally the enterprise has opted to defer amortization as much as 15 years to maximize our PAYGO program capacity in the near and midterm to accelerate the replacement of poor bridges. Given that the program has been in existence for about 15 years now, we have been able to drive down the percentage of poor rated bridges statewide. There's still certainly a need, but it does allow us a little bit more optionality in being more aggressive in paying down our debt than we have been in the past. Next slide, please. So this is the first of the two scenarios we're going to present you today. Do keep in mind that I'll be providing a comparison slide later in the deck to compare the two scenarios. So I know I tend to mentally try to bookkeep or compare the two scenarios as we go, but I'll be coming back to that and doing a side-by-side comparison. So our first structure provides level principal amortization and debt service payments throughout the 30-year term of the bonds, with the exception of the first 4 years. As I mentioned, we'd start amortization in 2029. So if you look at the graphic on the right-hand side of the screen, the portion of the bar shown in green is our senior bonds. So those are our existing debt obligations. So our 2019 and 2024 refunding bonds and the Central 70 note. The Series 2024 transaction is the transaction that was approved in April 2024 for the 10-year plan. The transaction that's the subject of this particular presentation is shown in blue. That's the Series 2025A transaction. And then we've also made a level debt service assumption for 2026. So you get the whole picture of what our portfolio of debt looks like if we deliver the entire plan of finance. So essentially everything existing and then the two planned transactions layered on top of one another. So in this scenario, to accomplish that project fund of $225 million, you have a par value here. The par value plus premium gives us that $225 million. This particular scenario under current market conditions would result in total gross debt service of just over $426 million. We also ran this through a net present value calculation as well, because if you compare the two structures, we will have varying debt service payments. So we wanted to consider the time value of money as well. So if you essentially discount the future debt service payments to $2025, the net present value debt service is just over $215 million. With a 30-year term, our final maturity is in fiscal year 2055, and our maximum annual aggregate debt service reaches roughly $90.5 million in this scenario. Next slide, please. So this scenario we're calling our 30-year modified wrap scenario. It also provides some modest principal amortization from 2029 on. It's a little bit difficult and nuanced to tell on the graph, but basically we're amortizing about $2 million in principal annually until fiscal year 2051. So that's to the far right-hand side of the graph. It goes to fiscal year 2055. Then we're backloading the remainder of the principal amortization from fiscal year 2052 to fiscal year 2055. So essentially, you can see that we pay off some of our existing debt obligations in the 2051, 2052 timeframe, and then backload or fill in principal after we've essentially received some relief from paying off those prior obligations. The trade-off in gross debt service is about $61 million difference between the two scenarios. If you do a net present value calculation, it's basically a break even between the two scenarios at $215 million. Again, this also has a 30-year term, so final maturity is in fiscal year 2055, and maximum annual aggregate debt service is a bit lower to the tune of about $2 million at about $88.5 million. Next slide, please. So this graphic essentially shows us the flip side of the prior scenarios I showed you. So we're looking at our pay-as-you-go program. So this is the annual funding we have available for projects. We both provide a baseline here, which is shown in blue, assuming we would issue no additional debt. Obviously, in that case, we would not be able to move forward and fund some of the projects we've been discussing, such as Floyd Hill, but it's good to evaluate the trade-off of making the decision to move forward with the transaction. So essentially, when we talk about our pay-as-you-go program, so we're not considering debt service, bond proceeds, any admin or operating costs. So this is solely the annual funding we have available for projects. So we also provided final maturity dates for our various existing debt obligations for reference. So you can see those called out on the slide. And generally, you'll also see that those are followed by a uptick in pay-as-you-go program capacity as we pay off those various obligations. So again, here at a high level, the trade-off of moving forward with the bond transaction is that we are committing roughly $20 million of our pay-as-you-go program capacity, assuming a 30-year term for those two remaining transactions. If we went to a 20-year term or a 15-year term, obviously, we could be consuming more of our pay-as-you-go program. So again, the blue is our baseline. The orange is the 30-year level scenario, and the green is the 30-year wrapped scenario. So other than the $20 million delta or trade-off, based on the decision to move forward with issuing the bonds, that you can also see the $2 million difference between the two options that we've presented here today. Our orange line, if you will, is, our green line's a bit lower than the orange line. So the trade-off in pay-as-you-go from now until 2051 is about $2 million of additional capacity with the wrap scenario. Then you look on the tail end of that, you can see the green line clearly below your orange line. So that's where we've backloaded principal amortization in that wrap scenario. And I do want to mention that the intention is to build in an optional par call provision into the bond issuance. And essentially that does allow us to revisit this in 10 years time. So at that time, the decision could also be made to accelerate principal amortization or push it out further. So in that respect, the 30-year wrapped option does provide us the highest degree of optionality. Next slide, please. So this is the comparison I mentioned earlier. This is looking side by side at the two options we're bringing you today through a few select bond statistics. You can see that the 30-year level scenario from a gross debt service perspective does provide $61 million in savings. When we run that through a net present value calculation, consider the time value of money. It is basically a break even between the two scenarios. The 30-year modified wrap structure provides us a slight reduction in our maximum annual debt service. That both increases our pay-as-you-go program on an annual basis from now to 2051. And also does provide us a slight improvement in debt service coverage and borrowing capacity. So really the primary trade-off we're evaluating here is essentially that benefit in reducing maximum annual debt service. And then in doing so, we're also deferring more principal to later years of the bond that would allow us greater flexibility to refinance in the future when future management has the opportunity to exercise that 10-year par call option. On the 30-year level side, you would be amortizing more principal in earlier years of the bond, but there would be a bit less flexibility to move forward. So at a staff level, the recommendation we wanted to bring to you today is to start to move forward with the 30-year modified wrap structure, assuming that there are no concerns from the board. And the reason we think that optionality is really our best path forward is twofold. So first, just based on the economics of the transaction, we think in 10 years' time, when future management will have the opportunity to exercise that par call option, that we should have more clarity on the funding resources available to the program. So currently, and I'll get into this a bit on the next slide, is we're actually only able to pledge our bridge safety surcharge revenues for repayment of these bonds due to the ongoing Americans for Prosperity lawsuit. With that being resolved, we would have access to be able to pledge our bridge and tunnel impact fee and bridge and tunnel retail delivery fee. So if we were to issue refunding bonds in the future, it would likely be at an improved rating, so likely reducing borrowing costs. And then the second piece of this is that at that point in time, we should have a better understanding of how the significant investment we've made in our bridge infrastructure through SB 260 and the IIJA has really impacted long-term trends in our bridge condition. So with all these projects we have going through the pipeline, we are seeing a modest decrease in the number of poor rated bridges and an increase in the number of good rated bridges, right? So long story short, giving ourselves a little bit of additional optionality in the future, we believe will be a benefit because, again, we'll have a better feel for what our funding resources are at that time and our challenges in terms of bridge condition. So at that time, are you more aggressive with paying down your debt, or do you try to increase the size of your pay-as-you-go program if you need more money to pump into the bridge population? Next slide, please. So a few other considerations for the transaction. So as I mentioned, the indenture that we're issuing bonds under does pledge our SB 260 bridge and tunnel fees for repayment of debt service if and when the Americans for Prosperity litigation reaches a final non-appellate judgment. So currently we're moving forward with this transaction only able to pledge our bridge safety surcharge. And with that, our credit ratings are an A+ stable with Moody's and an A- stable with S&P. Given that we have single A ratings, and this is similar to the last transaction, we are performing a break-even analysis to determine if we should consider credit enhancement through bond insurance, and whether that results in cost savings for the transaction. So we'll bring that to you next month. Essentially, we compare the cost of the insurance premium versus the savings on debt service costs, and determine on whether or not it makes financial sense to insure the transaction. We also have, as you'll notice, a 2-notch difference in credit rating between Moody's and S&P. So we're also planning to solicit a 3rd rating from Kroll. And then, as I mentioned, we are looking to build in a par call option into this transaction that's aligned with our last transaction. So essentially, future management teams will be able to make the decision whether or not to exercise that option in unison on both of these transactions, both our current transaction and the one we completed last year. Next slide, please.
Patrick, I
Yes.
see that Vice Chair Adams has got his hand up. Vice
Sure.
Chair Adams, would you like to ask a question now?
Yeah, I think it's a real short one, Patrick. I think you may have mentioned this. I just didn't understand, but maybe I'm confused. Are we planning to build the call option into both? Is it available in both financing options, or is it just in the wrap?
It's built into both.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I think the reason I was driving on it more with the wrapped option is that par call option does provide us the most optionality to either push out principal amortization or accelerate it when that decision point is reached. And yeah, so next slide, please. Okay. Oh, sorry, I've advanced one too far ahead. Can you go one back, Jamie? Thank you. So I believe you should all be familiar with the format that we're presenting our financial forecast in. So essentially, this is showing our programmatic baseline, assuming we have no additional bonding, except for the transactions that we've already completed. This table's comparing our sources and uses. So top line is showing the revenues flowing into the program. Second line is bond proceeds from the last transaction. We calculate a roll forward year to year, whether it's surplus or deficit, subtract out non-project expenses. So this is primarily debt service, subtract out funding needs for our 10-year plan and for our safety, critical, and asset management projects. And I will note that we're really solving for the current 4-year fiscally constrained period. So you'll see that the delivery of those projects tails off into fiscal year 29. So really, we're waiting until the next iteration of the 10-year plan to fill out, let's say, the back half of this table. But really, we're focused on solving for that near term or those next 4 years. And then finally, the bottom line is debt service that we incurred with our last debt issuance. So bottom line, or what we're getting to, is keeping our entire portfolio intact with the last transaction behind us. Our current deficit sits at about $242 million. Next slide, please. And then on this slide, essentially all of the variables remain equal except for those that we've highlighted. So this does assume that we complete the entire plan of finance. So we updated the bonding program to assume an additional $300 million in issuance. So I will note, when we created this table, we were still finalizing our commitments to the Floyd Hill project and kind of working through which elements were eligible. So I think in this instance, we're showing $200 million in fiscal year 25 and 100 in fiscal year 26. As it stands, we're pushing a little bit of that forward into 2025. So that $225 million target I mentioned earlier. We've also updated the total estimated debt service if we were to move forward with the entire plan of finance. With the finance dollars, we've called out essentially what we estimate to be our forecast low point in funding resources, which is roughly $25 million occurring in fiscal year 28. And then beyond that, in the subsequent 5 years, we have a rough average rounded up here of about $125 million in annual capacity to fund projects, essentially after we get over the hump of delivering this plan of finance in our current round of 10-year plan projects. Next slide, please. So we'll close this component of the workshop with a discussion on prospective transaction timing. So as you're aware, the schedule's slightly aggressive for this transaction. We're really threading the needle between the refunding that we completed in December and then Floyd Hill project funding needs. We expect construction expenditures on that project to begin in May. So this month, again, we're just looking for feedback on the direction we're headed with the transaction before we finalize the bond documents. The intention is to return to you next month for a request for approval of a resolution allowing us to move forward with the financing, as well as a request to allocate budget to the Floyd Hill project. In April, we'd anticipate pricing and closing on the bonds, and then we would have the proceeds available before construction expenditures began for Floyd Hill in the May timeframe. Next slide, please. All right, so that concludes our first component of the BTE workshop. I'll turn it over to the chair if there's any questions.
All right. Any questions, comments for Patrick here? I don't see any. It sounds to me like, oh, Commissioner Cook.
Yeah, sorry, I have trouble finding my hand too. I keep forgetting that it's under the React tab now. So Patrick, right quick, the modified RAP doesn't add to principal. The principal amount is the same. It's just a matter of when we're paying it. Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. Where are we at now? What percentage of our total budget is debt service? I just don't have that right in front of me once we issue this.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And if Jamie, you wouldn't mind going back, I think it's helpful to look at where we stand today. Basically, I think it's slide 11 shows the table. But I think the quick answer is it's about currently about a third of the program is dedicated for debt service. So the majority of the non-project expenses you see there, kind of on, oh, thank you. So essentially line 4, non-project expenses, and the final line, the infrastructure revenue bonds. So about 700, roughly rounded up, the 615 plus the 73 revenues over this time period are roughly $2 billion. So in the order of magnitude of a third, moving forward with these transactions does increase it slightly beyond that. So you're getting about a bit closer to 35 to 40%.
Okay. Do we have a target for where we want to be or don't want to exceed?
So if you wouldn't mind, could you go to slide 8, Jamie? So anecdotally, Director Cook, is really we've been evaluating or kind of targeting how much pay-as-you-go program capacity we have and really the health of that program. So a few things we see here is that we still have a year-over-year growth in the amount of funding we have to put additional projects on the street here. We also generally, there's a asset management modeling process we go through where essentially we input our annual budgets, take a look at how much projects cost to complete, and that's predictive and kind of doing our best, the best we can to determine what the future state of our asset pool looks like at a certain investment level. So essentially where we're at now and essentially the level of debt we're taking on basically shows that we're able to roughly maintain or keep pace with the needs of the bridge population. So essentially those two things, again, anecdotally looking for a healthy and increasing pay-as-you-go program, and then also looking to our asset management models just to make sure that our capacity isn't diminished to a point where we start to see potential problems down the road from lack of investment or decreasing levels of investment.
Got it. Thank you very much. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Vice Chair Adams.
So, Patrick, as you were speaking, one thing that's coming to my attention as I'm focusing on it is so much of our conversation earlier with Jeff and also with the earlier Floyd Hill, so much of it is focused around Floyd Hill. But as I recall, we were really concerned about the overall status of bridges in the state and the number of bridges with poor ratings. So if we take this transaction that you're suggesting here, what are we doing on the number of really poorly rated bridges and tunnels in the state that were in the earlier conversation, say a year or 2 years ago, was more the focus of what we were talking about when we were talking about the need for bridge and tunnel funding, was really intended to really help us address some of those poor quality or situations regarding those poorly rated bridges and tunnels. I'm assuming nothing has changed with that. It's just that Floyd Hill seems to be a dominant part of the conversations when we're explaining the use of funds, but it's not taking away anything from the rest of the program to address those other poorly rated bridges and tunnels. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's a rather complex question, and I'll certainly try my best to answer it here. And Jeff, if I miss anything here, do feel free to weigh in. I think what really the magnitude and timing of the Floyd Hill project does for us is creates a bottleneck, if you will, right? So there's really no way for us to keep pace, essentially with our typical pay-as-you-go program. As you'd imagine, we're constantly funding additional poor bridges to put them into the pipeline, get them into to design and construction. So just based on the size and timing of this Floyd Hill project, essentially financing that project allows us to continue moving other projects forward around the state while the Floyd Hill project is being completed. So essentially that's bringing the proceeds being used for Floyd Hill allows our remaining funds to be used on other bridge projects throughout the state.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, we're not putting on the back burner all those other bridge projects that we thought were rated poor. They're getting addressed at the same time we're addressing Floyd Hill.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Any further questions, comments? Patrick, thank you. It looks like we're good. And it sounds, and based on that, sounds like we're comfortable with staff's recommendation to proceed towards your targets in March and moving ahead.
Okay.
All right.
Chair Hart, I also wanted to bring up that there is a small second piece of our workshop as well, just since that got the presentation.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, I see it there. Apologize.
And Jamie, if you wouldn't mind pulling up slide 15 of the deck. Okay. Thank you. And I'll hand this component of the workshop off to our financial manager, Katie Carlson. Essentially, very quickly, what we want to do is walk you through the changes that have been made to our final budget since your approval of our proposed budget in November. So again, this is really augmenting or complementary to Jeff and Bethany's earlier presentation, just doing a slight deeper dive into changes to the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise budget in particular.
Thank you, Patrick. Next slide, please. So our agenda for today, it's pretty short. So first, we're going to start off just doing a recap of BTE's authority while we're in the budget setting process, kind of the basics of what we can do and not do as an enterprise. Then we're going to look into the revised forecast, and then we're going to look at the program allocations and the adjustments that we had to make in order to balance the budget to the new forecast, and then we'll discuss next steps. Next slide, please. So first, let's just do a quick recap. So let's talk about BTE's authority as we're setting our annual budget each year, and then also let's talk about when we sync up with the larger CDOT department-wide budget setting process. As a reminder, so BTE as an enterprise, we are self-supporting. We are a government-owned business that receives fee revenue. With that being said, we do have the statute and the bylaws that allow us to set our own budget. So we work through our board. We set the budget with you all. Once we get an agreement and we get approval of our budget, that gets built into the larger CDOT budget. It is important to note that we do have constraints. Those constraints are that we have to stay within the revenue forecast. That revenue forecast is developed by OFMB. The forecast that they have set for us, it's considered inflexible revenue. It cannot go to another program or another line within the revenue allocation plan. It can only be used for BTE. And so, like Patrick mentioned, the budget that we presented to you guys in the fall and November, there has been some changes, and now we're at the point now where we've made some adjustments and we're getting ready to incorporate that into the final budget that Bethany and Jeff will be presenting next month for approval. Next slide. So some of the changes that we'll be going over here is the revenue forecast. This slide here is going to go over some of the key highlight changes that have changed since we presented the budget in November. So some of the key changes are, one, as Patrick mentioned, we did have our refunding that took place in December. So that was the refunding of our 2010A series. So that created the 2024 refunding bonds and eliminated the BAB subsidy. That eliminated approximately a little over 5 million, about 5.1 million in BTE annual revenue. The next reduction that we saw in our revenue forecast, this came directly from OFMB forecast. So this was a decrease in the impact fee. So this was due to the fuel forecast changes that Bethany referenced earlier. So that's a little under $1 million that we had a reduction in. That was just on the impact fee. And then the last change overall, when you take all of that into consideration, we had a reduction in our overall revenue forecast by a little over 6 million, or about 3.2% overall. You'll see that the table to the right here, the graphic to the right, this represents all of our revenue sources in millions of dollars and also percentages. Our main revenue sources that you are aware of is our FASTR and our Senate Bill 260. So that's going to be the blue right there, which is our FASTR bridge safety surcharge. Then you get into the orange, which is our Senate Bill 260 impact fee. And then we have our Senate Bill 260 retail delivery fee in red. So that all of those combined, that makes up 91% of our overall estimated revenue for fiscal year FY26. Next slide. So in order to balance the budget, like we mentioned, we had to make some reductions. So this slide is focused specifically on the program allocations reductions that we had to make in order to balance the budget within that new revenue forecast. So let's walk through these. The first one that we're going to mention is going to be to our admin and operating. So overall, we reduced a little over 600,000. This reduction specifically was focused on staff compensation. So we did have more staff that came on board for BTE. So we were able to reduce our consultant program, but then we did update our staff compensation to include new staff that started. We did have a reduction in our overall debt service. This was due to the recent refunding that we just took place that happened in December. And then we also had to make some reductions to our overall unprogrammed budget allocations. So that all of those reductions combined allowed us to make that $6 million reduction. The graphic over here to the right that you'll see, this is all of our program allocations. You'll notice that you guys kind of talked about this a little bit with Patrick, but you'll notice that there in the green section is our debt service. So that's a little bit over a third of what we're spending on for the program. You'll notice that the purple right there, that is our capital construction program. And then the remaining right there, the 3%, is made up of a little bit for our administration and other operating expenses. Next slide. And then we just wanted to talk about next steps and how we're syncing up with OFMB. So right now we are presenting the final budget to you all. We're requesting any feedback or comments. Next month we will return requesting approval. This is getting incorporated into the budget that Bethany presented earlier. Everything does align. And then they will be sending the budget off, as they mentioned, off to the governor for approval. So we just need to work with the board, just make sure we incorporate any additional changes and then get that over to OFMB so everything can be incorporated into the larger budget.
All right, Katie, thank you. Not a small item, a critically important item, but thank you for keeping it short and sweet and right to the point. Are there any questions or comments with regard to the draft budget, proposed budget for 2026? Hearing none, looks like that everybody's comfortable with it and we're teed up to head into the March meeting for adoption. So Katie, thank you for that. Appreciate it. All right, folks, I need feedback on your direction. We have a break scheduled now for 15 minutes. Would you like to do that, or would you like to plow ahead and continue through the agenda? It's up to you. If I don't hear anything, we'll plow ahead. That seems to be a positive. Okay, let's go ahead and plow ahead. That way we can get done with the meeting and get to warmer spots. So that takes us to the next item then, the right-of-way condemnation authorization request with Keith Stefanik.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hart. So we have two items on this workshop today. There's two different landowners on the same project. So the project is the I-25 North Segment 5 project up in Region 4. And Regional Transportation Director Heather Paddock is going to describe the project a little bit more, the status on the right-of-way acquisition through the history, and then we'll get into some of the specifics on these two parcel owners. But just to reiterate, we will tomorrow be asking for two separate resolutions to move forward with right-of-way condemnation proceedings for two property owners on the same I-25 North Segment 5 project. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather to walk through kind of the overall status of the I-25 North right-of-way acquisition for that project, and also some of the subject areas on this parcel. Go ahead, Heather. I'm not sure Heather is with us, so I'll just move forward with this. So next slide, please. So this just describes on the first property. So the first property, here are several temporary construction or temporary easements and a utility easement that we need to obtain for the north I-25 Segment 5 project. Hey. Oh, sorry, here's Heather.
My apologies, technology. Yeah, so the I-25 project, I know most of you guys are familiar with. This is Segment 5, the last section of, that's a 2-lane section out there. It's about 6 miles long. We started the contract and the design 16 months ago, and we have already acquired 27 out of the 29 parcels, which is pretty fantastic for right-of-way acquisition and for this project. Not to mention, we are well underway. We've negotiated 2 of the 3 construction packages. And if you've driven the corridor, you can see the progress that's been being made at, my opinion, really fast speed. So jumping now towards the reason why we're here, which are 2 potential condemnations. We are requesting condemnation authority for these 2 parcels. So this first one are really just some small temporary easements and utility easements for some drainage improvements, as well as some utilities. We are partnering with Little Thompson Water District on this. And I will say that we've talked with the landowner, and this would be more of your friendly condemnation. The reason for this is they've got some concerns with the language that's written, because we are basically acquiring this land in conjunction with the Little Water Thompson District. And so they're trying to work out some of the nuances in the contract. But if we can forward to the next slide, this shows just a blow up of those TEs. If you can get to the next slide. And one more. They're just these little slivers. And one more. It will show you that we are pretty aligned in where we are offering and where the landowner is at. Again, we are hoping to reach resolution without having to go to condemnation, but there is some language that we are working out with the landowner and the Little Thompson Water District to basically move these easements forward. So that's the reason for requesting condemnation authority.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. So, commissioners, you can see we have gone through the notice of intent to acquire. There was a valuation made. We made the initial offer of about little under $5,000 for the property. We have yet to make the revised offer or the last written offer. Or, I'm sorry, we did make the revised offer of just over $2,500 after the utility easement decreased in size a little bit. So basically, as Heather indicated, working with the landowners, the next step really here is to move towards condemnation to try to work the matters out. Hopefully, amicably, if not, move ahead with condemnation. So with that, we'll open it up to any questions on that particular property, or we can move on to the second owner.
All right, any questions about that one? I don't see any. Go ahead, Keith.
Give Jamie a second to pull up the second slide deck.
Yeah, perfect. So this property is adjacent or really in close proximity of the other parcel. If you can go to the next slide. In this property is a fairly large property, but we are acquiring the right of way here to, we are actually removing the frontage road in this location. We will be cul-de-sacking it. A new adjacent roadway called High Plains Boulevard is going to be built about a half a mile away from I-25, which is really the preferred distance. And that is where these parcels, and they have known this, will receive access. So really the reason for acquiring this fee simple is for a future utility access road and then some relocated utilities. Next slide. Just another picture. I think I just want to note, if you can see below the pink is heavy wetland area. So this whole parcel, not necessarily all the portion that we are taking, but adjacent to it is a very high wetland area. And I think I just am noting that because it does play into the valuation of this property. So as you can see, we've done an initial appraisal and initial valuation. We are very far off between what our appraisers came back with as far as the value of that parcel or that sliver of the parcel compared to what the owner's appraisal came back at. We are still continuing to exercise some other options with that property owner. The main reason for the differences is they are basically they've indicated that because of the access changes that they're claiming a lot of damages to their property. So I think there's two main concerns here. One, I think they're valuing wetland area as very developable property, and so they're using very, very high values for this land, as well as they're trying to seek some damages based on access. We do not believe that is the case, and that is why we are pursuing an option. We are hoping to reach a settlement. We are continuing to have conversations with this property owner, but they are coming back with, they're really only interested in something that is closer to their appraised value than ours. And that's why we're seeking condemnation authority on this parcel.
And thank you, Heather. And so just in quick summary, from Chief Engineer's perspective, I agree with both of these requests to move forward with condemnation proceedings on this one project for these two landowners, and look forward to presenting a resolution or two resolutions to the Transportation Commission tomorrow in order to do that. So with that, Heather and I are welcome to answer any questions related to these two parcels.
All right, thank you, Heather and Keith. Are there any questions with regard to this matter? Hearing none, it sounds like we're good to go to tomorrow. So thank you very much for that good explanation. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay, Keith, I think that's all we have for you right now. Our next item is Traffic Incident Management, Incident Response Team, and Safety Patrol with Bob Pfeiffer.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Can you see my screen okay, Chair?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners, for this opportunity to provide an informational workshop today regarding the background and purpose of our traffic incident management program. Specifically, we will be sharing information on how Safety Patrol and Incident Response Program work within a nickname for traffic incident management is TIM framework, and their importance to highway safety. This program focuses on most congested and crash-prone highways, primarily within Region 1, and small portions of I-25 within Region 2 and 4. Now, I will say I did my best to do a Lower May type PowerPoint, so bear with me as I try to get fancy here. So first thing is the unplanned roadway events increase the likelihood of secondary crashes and threaten the safety of incident responders and the traveling public. On interstates within the city and county of Denver, the average daily trips is at 269,000 vehicles a day, meaning that every 10 to 20 seconds of an on-scene first responder at a primary crash on the interstate, the probability of a secondary crash increases by 1%. Several findings and research support a fast incident response and crash clearance as a primary focus to reduce the chances of secondary crashes. And you'll learn that with secondary crashes, when they happen, those are likely the likelihood of a fatality. So on average, if a traffic incident lasts longer than 33 minutes, then the secondary accident is likely to occur. In incidents affecting the travel reliability, commerce, and transportation system performance, one of the essential responsibilities of transportation and public safety agencies is to ensure the safety and quick clearance of traffic incidents. Every primary crash and every stranded motorist on the shoulder increases by the probability to a secondary crash. This is why we implemented the Safety Patrol program and incident response teams to ensure that rapid response to quickly remove these incidents reduce the probability of that secondary crash. TIM is integral to the U.S. Department of Transportation's National Roadway Safety Strategy and is specifically called out as a key element for post-crash care objectives. The goal of the Federal Highway Administration's TIMS program is to improve the safety of responders, crash victims, and road users continuously and reliability of travel, as well as reduce travel delays, congestion, support better air quality, energy savings, and efficiency of incident and emergency response through the institutionalizing of a TIMS program within a DOT. Now, we've adopted a pretty strong program here, and it's been here quite some time, and you'll learn some history. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm hoping this will work right. We will be sharing a video, so hopefully this will come through, give you a synopsis of what we do in our Incident Safety Patrol.
Currently stuck on I-70.
It's been 18 hours that I've been on the road.
This has been the most epic snowstorm experience I've ever had.
currently stuck on I-70.
It's been 18
Can everyone
hours.
hear that?
I've been on the road.
This has been the most epic snowstorm
Cam?
experience I've ever had.
Incident response within the Traffic Incident Management Program is really a collaboration of activities between partner agencies and responding agencies on how we work together during an incident response. As different agencies, we have different priorities. So working to train together to identify how those priorities work together, it actually makes us work faster.
TIM training is critical because state troopers are always out there right up against traffic. Our goal is to isolate those firefighters and EMS personnel so they can get their job done.
We've got a spring storm. Sounds like the priority right now is life safety. We've got some people stuck in cars that have been out there for quite a while. Everybody, 5 o'clock start, you know, they're hitting the road. Be prepared to spend the day, maybe have to stay out for the night.
So right now we're out on I-70. We're behind a little road blockage because we've had a couple feet of snow here on the Genesee Ridge, and CDOT's out working their heart out, trying to keep the road open so we can get it open.
Our big thing is get that truck out of the way. Once we got him out of the way, we can start pulling these cars and getting them up there. So we need to go find them and get them to a safe place. We'll look for any cars off the road, anything like that. We want to make sure we clear vehicles out of the roadway so we can get our heavy equipment in, plows, and open the roadways back up. They had 2 jackknife trucks and 6 or 8 cars all stuck, but clearing the 251, that way when we get to the next section, the highway's clear. Well, hopefully you'll be able to just take your time, don't spin your tires, be gentle. Once you get up over the hill, it should be good to get into Denver. No one really has all the tools or toys to fix every problem, so we have to work together. Whether we're working with state patrol, local fire, EMS, even tow companies, we're out there to help each other, get in there, do our job safely, and move on. We enjoy helping people. You know, you get out there, do the right thing. When somebody's having their worst day, we want to be there to make it better.
Okay, to get us back on track here. All right. Hopefully you enjoyed a little bit break of something a little bit different there. You can hear me all right still, Chair? All right.
You are fine. Go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. So at CDOT, we design our program to embrace the TIMS principle, and between Safety Patrol and our incident response team, we manage traffic during an incident, contributing to improve the safety for our drivers and first responders, as you were seeing in that video. And we design it to quickly arrive at an incident, allow efficient traffic management, and then do a quick scene clearance, reducing the incident duration and return the highway to normal operations. That is the key for everything that these teams do. We assist stranded motorists and crash victims. We provide on-scene and real-time updates to the traffic conditions and the crashes and stranded motorists through the Traffic Operations Center, which some of you have visited, and through CoTrip. And for every minute a lane is closed, it takes on average 4 minutes for it to recover to normal traffic flow. So the sooner we can clear the crash and open up the lanes, we will reduce the delays for deliveries, people going to and from work, and commerce to traverse our state. Now, when we talk about some of the tools in traffic incident management, we include automation and detection systems and cameras and advanced warning, and you sometimes see those big message boards. We talk about CoTrip. We report on different type of channels and radios and work zone intrusion devices. There's all sorts of ways that we try to do to detect a problem, one, to keep a safe system, but also to save lives. But there are different tools within TIMS practices. Like here on this chart, you'll see there's detection and monitoring. So that's usually cameras or queuing and speed sensors and traffic signal sensors that help us detect if there's a problem. Communication and coordination is key, how we used our radios to communicate with law enforcement and first responders. We have dedicated platforms where we specialize in sharing incident information between other groups. So when we have a big closure, we know where the closure points are and how to set them up. And we're one of the first that are about to implement within all the DOTs a computer-aided dispatch, which is the same thing that police and first responders use to quickly get to a scene. And that way we can use our computers to tell first responders what we have going on, and we can do dispatching through computer to computer. But then also we have traffic control systems warning systems where we give those big message boards, and we have traffic signals that preempt allow emergency vehicles to go through the light. We also, one of the last tools we look into is the incident clearance and response. And this is really kind of where safety patrol and incident response reside, is kind of in these tool areas. And they really try to affect quick clearance, safety to our first responders, and making sure that the traveling public is safe as they traverse by a crash. And many of these tools are supported by groups like the Traffic Operations Center, Intelligent Transportation System, which is ITS. You've all met Allie and her team, and the Office of Emergency Management. But but where we're going to really focus on is really about the safety patrol and the incident response team, and how we use them within our toolbox. The incident response team, we'll start with them first. They were established an in-sourced program in about 2017. The program's purpose of the incident response team is to enhance communication, post-crash care, and safety among CDOT employees, first responders, and the traveling public during incidents and crashes that impact the travel lanes. Now, secondarily, the incident response team helps keep CDOT maintainers focused on maintenance activities versus responding to crashes all the time. The incident response team operates mostly within Region 1 and primarily on the interstates, and sometimes we'll travel out onto the secondary, depending if it's a high volume corridor. But the incident response team, on average, responds to about 18 lane impacting incidents a day in just Region 1 alone. And we've hit over almost 5,400 incidents last year. And that's just in basically the Region 1 area. As one of the most effective elements of successful TIMS program, some of the fundamental benefits and core services of the incident response team include like assessing and responding to life safety, safeguarding the scene of crash victims, rapid initial assessment coordination, where we coordinate with the first responders with any type of special equipment that might be needed. Obviously, quick clearance. We represent, when we show up on a scene, the incident response team are the on-scene representatives for CDOT, so any additional resources that they may need. We do any critical reporting. We start assessing environmental impacts like fuel spills and so forth. And then we just make sure that the scene is clear of all debris at the end of the day, and that we can restore the highway back to its normal condition. Now, the incident response program is an in-source service, highly trained, certified employees that specialize specialize all the way from the vehicles to the patrols, mostly on congested highways. And I listed there the hours of service. They're not 24 hours a day, and some other DOTs they are, but here this is the hours we work, and we're mostly in Region 1, and that's all the way up into Silverthorne. We only have 8 vehicles, 7 members, and 1 supervisor, and it costs us about a little over $1 million a year. Now, the Safety Patrol program, this one's been around for quite some time, and in fact, I even got the date wrong. But we established this. This is a contracted service, and it was actually called the Mile High Courtesy Patrol. And I had to pause there for a minute because I remember when they were driving these little red trucks around, and I actually got help by getting fuel. That was probably the mid-90s, and then it turned into the Safety Patrol. But it was actually established in 1992. The Safety Patrol primarily assists stranded motorists, and mostly on the shoulders. They don't always work in the lane of travels. That's where our incident response mostly works in. But you'll notice they're usually on the side, providing advance warning, jump starts, tire changes, even directions. Some people need directions to get around the city. But they also assist the CDOT Traffic Operations Center with locating incidents, removing debris, and assisting with traffic control. Since then, the Safety Patrol has driven more than 5 million miles and have responded to more than 500,000 incidents in their patrol area. Basically, what it boils down to is they're clearing an incident every 12 minutes. And so each year it's estimated that over 1.1 million breakdowns on Colorado highways per year. The Safety Patrol assists to over 40,000 motorists annually in the areas they patrol. As one of the most effective elements of the successful TIN program, some of the fundamental benefits and core services the Safety Patrol program include reducing the incident duration, helping stranded motorists and crash victims, assisting with traffic control and advance warning, picking up debris, and then just real-time updates on the traffic conditions. The CDOT Safety Patrol program is a contracted service with a company called Incident Clear, and they're trained professionals using their specialized gear and equipment. And basically their hours of service are listed up there. And there's actually 56 vehicles that are used. And those are both the pickup trucks you see there. We have tow trucks, we have heavy tow. And we do get a sponsorship that helps with that $6.78 million it costs this year. We get from Geico currently, we get $675,000, and then CTIO contributes to the operations where we have general purpose lanes and managed lanes. And that kind of leads into my next slide, which Piper, are you on? Because I think you want to talk on the next slide. But Piper wanted to talk about their growing support of the program.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I appreciate you giving me a few minutes on your presentation here to talk a little bit about a great opportunity that CTIO has been talking with Bob and his team about, specifically related to the I-70 mountain corridor. As most of you are aware, CTIO operates peak period shoulder lanes, which are shoulders that we're able to open during, again, peak times. The name is pretty self-explanatory, to help clear traffic. So this is roughly 12 express lane miles in each direction. So 24 express lane miles that we operate. And we rely heavily on the Safety Patrol services, one, to help clear the lane when we're going to open it. We need to make sure that it's clear of debris, free of snow, and we need to have kind of an increased presence of Safety Patrol services in the area when that lane is open, right? These are periods of higher congestion. We are using a shoulder, so we rely heavily on the Safety Patrol services when we are opening the Mexel lane to traffic. So we have been talking with Bob and team about an opportunity potential to sponsor a patrol, which currently doesn't have one. And CTIO has also been looking for ways to reinvest some of the safety and toll enforcement civil penalty revenue that we've been collecting from these lanes. So as a quick reminder, we're able to issue civil penalties for people who drive in it when it's closed, or weave in and out and cross those solid lines, or for multi-axle vehicles that use that narrower lane. So this opportunity came up, and my tolling operations team approached Bob with this idea, and really it's a win-win for CTIO and CDOT. Our board has directed, the CTIO board has directed my team to, one, look for ways where we can reinvest these civil penalties in things that improve safety. And visibly, we are going to be getting, in exchange for the sponsorship, some advertising on the trucks. Bob put some great, these are some concepts that we've mocked up with Bob and team on what that express lane advertising would look like. It's a great visible way for us to show stakeholders that we are reinvesting money where we can in the corridor. This is a service that consistently gets high praise from the public. So it's really a win-win for CDOT and CTIO, right? It's going to fill a budget need for Bob and his team, and it's going to help CTIO publicly support safety with these revenues that we've been collecting on the corridor. So part of this was so that I could tee up tomorrow. You're going to be asked to take action. I think it's proposed resolution 11 on an interagency agreement between CTIO and CDOT, which is essentially going to just memorialize this proposal. It is going to cover a year one. We're going to see how it goes for a year. We are going to be sponsoring 9 trucks, $50,000 a truck for $450,000 total, that we will be paying to CDOT to put these logos on the cars. And, there's quite an extensive scope of work in there, but they'll continue to provide all of the great services they're already providing up there. So the IAA is just going to memorialize kind of terms and conditions of the arrangement, the process for payment, and how, you know, DMO and is going to be able to report to CTIO on sort of the outcome of the sponsorship. So just to tee that up for tomorrow, Chair Hart, there is an action item related to this that I'll be presenting again, but wanted to kind of piggyback on Bob's presentation to give some more background and how this sort of came about. So happy to answer any questions on kind of the CTIO portion of this, but I appreciate you giving me a few minutes, Bob, to tee up the action item tomorrow.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go back on a slide. The highlighted area in purple is the roads that the Safety Patrol program currently patrols. US 36 has their own, that's through Plenary, and Central 70, if you notice, there's a gap between 225 and I-25 on I-70. That is done with our partners there as well. It's not that it's not being patrolled by Safety Patrol, it's just done by a different organization. But you can see the miles that they patrol. It's quite a bit for hitting 40,000 incidents a year. So that's all we had. I know I kind of went quick. I want to, since you were on a roll and you got me off guard by not doing a break, I thought I better go just as fast as you guys are going. So if you have any questions, we're here to answer any questions, myself or Piper. And
Bob, we never miss an opportunity to create an emergency for staff. So thank you for rolling with the punches.
Could I ask, Chair, could I ask one quick question of Bob?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Bob, how did you get to Geico? Did they approach us, or did we actually call on them? And it leads to a natural for someone like, why wouldn't AAA be also a potential sponsor of some segment of this state as well for something like this?
Yeah, so the sponsor was actually brought to us by Instant Clear, our contractor, and they have connections nationally through Travelers Insurance, actually. And Travelers is actually the clearinghouse of other sponsors of safety patrols throughout the United States. And so what they do is they'll put out a solicitation and say, who would like to sponsor this safety patrol program in this DOT area? And Geico was the one that said, well, we'll do it at this rate. You know, and that is ending in a year. I'll tell you, we believe that the value of the marketing, the other DOTs are getting some more money than we'd get. So we're hoping to negotiate that next year to help with that program, because that program is mostly paid by the congestion mitigation, the CMAQ money. And that's how that program is funded. But the need and demand for safety patrol and incident response is growing. You can see, like with Vail Pass and some others where it's outside of our patrol areas, it's getting more and more. I hate to say it, but it seems like the suburb are growing further out from the core of Denver, and the demands are there. So we're hoping that we can get more sponsorship dollars over time and be able to expand the program to support our traveling public.
Thank you.
I know it's a long answer, but hopefully it was thorough.
No, it just seems like someone like AAA, I know they've got their relationship with the various outfits, but I use my AAA frequently, and I would think that they'd be better off using a service like this on highways than having to call a record service to come in. So this would be a good way for them to get advertisement, as well as less costly than what they currently have to do. Would be a really good option for them from an advertisement standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And remember, everything we do is free. So too.
Yeah. You got a couple of hands up. First, Commissioner Gutierrez.
Yes, I noticed when I saw on your slide here the map that the services appear in segments 6, 7, and 8, and I'm assuming that once segment 5 is completed, that service will be added to segment 5 as well up on North I-25 there, south of Johnstown to the Longmont exit there.
Yeah, when that does, we currently do not have funding to close that gap. That will be something we'll be looking at doing.
Okay.
And that's why that gap exists there today.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up is Commissioner Ritter.
given the safety elements, how much are you guys involved in wildlife, auto interaction and accidents? And is that part of your portfolio?
If there is anything that impedes the lane of travels or disrupts traffic flow, this team and the incident response team in these areas will respond. That includes conflicts with wildlife, to just even a pedestrian walking on the side of the road will have us respond.
I think this is great stuff. Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? Well, Bob and Piper, thank you so much for this. I agree. I think this is a wonderful program. I see them on a fairly regular basis in my travel back and forth between Southern Colorado and Denver. So it's good to see them out there, and reminds us historically of the Colorado Courtesy Patrol that started the state patrol. So it's nice seeing. I think it's just an incredibly good service, and frankly, I love the element of it to try to avoid secondary incidents, particularly with the statistics that you provided to us. So thank you very much. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to the next item, which is our Audit Review Committee. Frank Spinelli.
Hi, thank you. I have my video on, but it's facing the wrong way. I don't know why. And let me, I have presentation.
Frank, that's not a good start.
Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
And let me see if I can turn this thing around here. Choose it. That work or no?
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'd like to start with the Audit Review Committee and jump to the next slide here, if I can. Okay, the agenda is we're gonna call to order. Chair Adams, motion to approve October 16th minutes, the motion to approve the latest internal audit report of DAF's year-end close process and some statutory violations they've been experiencing. We're going to discuss the risk assessment that the audit review committee that the audit division team just undertook. The 2026 fiscal 2026 internal and external audit plan, and the status of the outstanding recommendations. Any questions on the agenda? And would you like to call to order?
Frank, just before you do, could you remind everybody who the commissioners are that are sitting on the audit review committee, so we know who to make motions and seconds?
Sure. We have the chair of Eula Adams, Chair Adams, and we have two other commissioners, Rick and Riddick and Hannah Parsons as the two commissioners on there.
Excellent. Thank you very much for clarifying.
You're welcome, Jess. Okay, so I'm asking for a motion to approve the October 16th to 24 minutes, and these minutes have been sent to the three commissioners that I've just mentioned, and for the rest of the TC committee, once they're approved, they'll be in next month's March's TC package. In the information purpose section of your package. So you'll have both these minutes and the report, the DAF report, if it gets released as well, which is up next.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Yeah, I'll second it.
All right. Minutes are approved. Thank you. Now I'd like to talk about the DAF internal audit report that the audit division just completed. I need a motion, one of these four motions, a motion and vote to release the report and thereafter discuss it. If you chose this one, then we can talk about some of the slides that are after this. The other three motions are a motion and vote to release the report without discussing it, motion and vote to release the report on a limited basis, or a motion and vote to not release the report without discussion. Can I have a motion, please?
I move that we release the report and discuss it after.
I'll second.
Okay. Bring this over.
Where it passes.
There we go. So the objective of the report was to evaluate DAF's operations with respect to year-end close and statutory violation processes. And this audit was initiated at the request of the CFO and part of DAF's strategic strategy for continuous improvement. The audit found some opportunities to improve some processes, and it matters because the improved processes should increase efficiency and regulatory compliance. Any questions on the objective conclusion of why does it matter? The audit provided some recommendations and improvements, and some of them are on the year-end closeout to streamline the year-end calendar steps, increase the accrual materiality threshold to $5,000, which has already been implemented, and we'll discuss a little more on that in a later slide. Require vendors and subrecipients to submit invoices timely, pay all or most vendors electronically, attach the subrecipient tool to the shopping cart, which is part of our ERP system within CDOT. Review and correct diagnostic reports timelier, which DAF's been doing for more than a year at this point, because we were looking at fiscal year 23 data. Other improvements that audit made dealt with grant contracts and purchase orders in order to better comply with regulations, and that was to provide better monitoring of grant contracts and purchase orders, and obtain faster approval of contracts, grant contracts and purchase orders. Any questions? We also, in the audit, audit also identified some other matters that weren't directly related to the audit objective, but that they warrant attention by management, which are the grant abstracts should be required, or to help with requirements of the grant itself, and help all of the stakeholders understand what needs to be done and how it should be done. Reconcile DTR grants to what's been applied for in TRAMS, to what's been obligated by FTA. TRAMS is a software used by the FTA to understand the grants that are being available and to apply to those that you may have a need to. So after reconciling that to the FTA, then to the OFMB, and then to the actual DTR budget. Review where necessary and revalidate some Z-code transactions in SAP. So Z-code transactions are custom codes that are written within SAP, our ERP system, for customized reports, for transferring of data from one software to another, interchanges, and they've been they started to be written around 2006, 2007, and over that time from 2006 to present, we've accumulated about 614 Z codes. So it's recommended that we get an understanding of what these key Z codes do better, decommission those that are no longer needed, and to train staff so they're aware of the sources of data for the reports that they prepare for year-end reporting and the TC presentations. And then the last thing on the Z codes was have a senior financial executive or other senior executives to review the Z code for changes relevant to for their department. Any questions on that? Okay, why did it happen? Well, there's lack of training. There's been a lot of staff turnover, especially in DTRA. I guess a lot of CDOT, there's been a lot of turnover. We lack desk guides to help new people come in and understand the process. People are relearning the process every time that they're joining the organization. And then there's limitations with SAP, our ERP system. DAF's already made implemented corrective change actions, and some of those examples include, and they've invested in bringing on additional staff. They're cross-training many of those individuals on the year-end close activities and other processes that they run within DAF. They've implemented a new diagnostic report process to identify and correct errors and more timely each month, and when the correct errors, it's basically what's with the Office of the State Controller and the transferring of CDOT's financial information to CORE, which is the software used by OSC. DAF's already spoken to the controller at the OSC office and received approval to increase the materiality threshold for accruals to 5,000. That's already been accomplished. And DAF has already established a subrecipient grants support unit to improve grant processes and to centralize some of the elements of a grant process that can be easily centralized. Any questions on the DAF audit? I'm going to move on. We're going to talk about the 2025-26 risk assessment. The risk is looking to, link to the audit plan. What did we identify? What are the consequences? What is the likelihood it's going to happen? So those are the things we start talking about and speaking to stakeholders within CDOT to get a better understanding of where our next audit should lie, where are the most risk, and where can audit drive the most improvement. The purpose of the risk assessment to identify potential risks faced by CDOT and assess the likelihood and potential impact. Audit standards require that risk assessments be performed. Risk assessments help identify where improvement may be needed most. And audit, we have conducted 25 risk assessments, interviews with senior personnel in December, just this last December, to come up with our next internal audit plan. Some of the items that we heard is SAP is outdated. Data in SAP can be unreliable at times. In certain departments, we may rely heavily on consultants. Certain departments, we rely heavily on consultants. Contracted procurement process can be greatly inefficient. And I'm not going to read them all, but just wanted to give you a sense of what we heard during our risk assessment interviews a couple months ago. And I want to thank everyone at CDOT during the risk assessment interviews. It really, even on the DAF audit, the DAF audit, the CFO and the personnel are very, they're open. They have a willingness to share what's going on. They don't hold anything back to audit, and that helps audit. And I want to thank my team for really gathering all this data and process it and summarize it, because without either DAF's or my team's help, the report wouldn't have been able to be completed, as well as this risk assessment. Again, the senior people at CDOT are really willing to be upfront with audit and open the closets sometimes, and that helps us. That helps us think of strategic approaches to drive improvement. So thank you. So the top risk factors that we've identified, this fiscal year going into next year's are procurement and contracting processes, staffing and succession planning, employee instructions. We used to say policies and procedures, but it's more than policies and procedures. It's manuals, which can be procedures, but when we say policies and procedures, people just focus on PDs. And it's not just PDs. It could be memos. It could be manuals, as I said. It's any kind of directive that we're giving an employee to execute a task. Technology, employee cross-training, regulatory, and assets. So in the procurement and contracting processes, there's delays in the procurement process, including contract review and approval, and has been cited many times as a significant inefficiency. This is an area that the CFO is currently working with a consulting group and looking at a reorganization. And because of this timing, audit decided at the CFO's request not to perform an audit in the procurement and contracting process at this time. Staffing and succession planning. At times there could be delays on the onboarding, and that could be derived from many different places. It could be within HR internally, it could be within management, where there's delay in responses to questions or inquiries. And it also could be delays from working with other agencies within the onboarding process. I know we have to work with a couple other agencies, and there could be delays in the timing of getting information back and approvals back. Employee instructions, as I was discussing earlier, it's an overlapping and overly detailed policies, procedures, manuals, memos. It has created inefficiencies and confusion across divisions. And sometimes the communication, sometimes could be siloed, and we can do a better job in having more transparency across divisions and departments. Technology, we have an outdated system, SAP. When I say outdated, it was initially configured in 2006, and that's the configuration we still have today, along with a bunch of custom codes on top of it. So we have about 20 years of an initial configuration that probably didn't take into consideration many of the nuances that exist today. Maybe some new nuances that may come into the future, and it creates the need for a lot of manual intervention amongst the CDOT staff. Cross training, we're getting better at that, but it probably led to some of the year-end closing issues. There was a single employee, which led the objective, and sometimes things fell through the cracks, and having more than one understand task is probably a best practice, better way to go. Regulatory, there's an increase in non-compliance with federal, state due to inefficiency, again, in the contract procurement and insufficient grant monitoring. The insufficient grant monitoring perhaps could be corrected with the centralized department that DEF is going to currently work to bring some task in there for them to do. And the inefficiencies, the contract procurement, hopefully will work out over time as well with the consultants in there. And then assets. There's a concern that additions and disposals of capital assets are not being properly managed. And there's a concern that tools, supplies could be misappropriated. This could result in inaccurate reporting and then, disclosure of assets within the financial system. Any questions so far? So with that said, for the fiscal year 26 internal audit plan, the proposed audit is on capital assets. We like to assess the processes for maintaining capital assets and inventory records to better ensure assets as well as tools and supplies are properly accounted for. The selection was based upon a couple prior audits that indicated control weaknesses. Also as a secondary follow-up on the audit recommendations that were made in the 2017 and 2018 audits. One was on equipment mechanic shop and the other one was on the security of facilities. It's also based upon our risk assessment. The impact, the capital assets affects a number of CDOT departments that's involved. When I say affects, they're involved in the process. So some of the departments that are involved in the process are maintenance and operations, the division of accounting and finance staff, the transportation development and engineering. On the audit frequency, so on the overall process for capital assets has not been audited in the past for CDOT. So that's another reason why we should look at the cradle to grave process for capital assets. There could be insufficient guidance. The accounting and policies, procedures, they may be outdated. Some internal controls could be missing to what's actually written. And an overall comprehensive manual on the capital assets process doesn't exist. And it's a high risk based on our risk assessment. Any questions on the proposed audit? Some of the risk factors addressed in this audit would be assets, resource allocation, employee instructions, regulatory, and technology. We also chose a couple alternatives to the audit plan, just in case we run into issues on the capital assets. One would be assess the HR operations with respect to the onboarding, training of employees, mainly when they get promoted, co-wins, which is the partnership agreement between CDOT employees and the union, and personal identification information. Which may need better practices on how to control the documentation. That audit will address risk factors such as talent management, staffing meaning skills, alignment, and adequacy. Do we have enough? And regulatory. And the other alternative is the procurement and contracting process with respect to DEF and engineering. It's the process mainly lies with DEF. Engineering is there just if there's an opportunity to centralize again some of the tasks within procurement and contracting. Audit wanted to know or see what engineering, how they contributed to that process. That audit addressed risk factors such as procurement and contracting processes, project management, project costs and expenditures. So I like the ARC members to make a motion and approve the proposed internal audit and the alternatives. Again, the proposed audit would be on the capital asset and the inventory records, and the internal audits would be on human resources and procurement and contracting. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Frank, I'll second the motion. I do have some observations and comments that I've been withholding until we get to the end, but okay. But I'll second that motion.
Okay, thank you. We also, the audit division also we have an internal audit side, which we just went into a little much in depth there. We also have an external side. So the external side helps, it's more like a consulting group helping management. And I would like for their audit plan to be approved as well. Some of the things they do is they'll perform master price agreement reviews, and what they're looking to do there is ensure that we have fair and reasonable salaries or rates, hourly rates with professionals, architects and designers. And it's more of a proactive approach. Audit needs to perform final audits. So rather than, the final audit would ensure that fair and reasonable rates were being charged. Here, we're approving the rates before they're doing the construction work, and management will take the documentation that audit has prepared and align it with the rates that we deem to be fair and reasonable. And this, to me, I think is a great savings for CDOT and the state. As far as the rates that we've identified as being perhaps more than fair and reasonable in reducing them. We have employee additions. So again, to those master price agreements, we may have a new employee leave, an old employee leave, or a new employee join, replacing that person leaving. So we would have to do a fair and reasonable on those new additions as well. There's about 450 there. We do subrecipient monitoring, compliance reviews. We do single audit reviews. Here, we're ensuring that municipalities are doing what they're supposed to be doing based on the single audit, the internal control deficiencies that have been identified by the external audit that performed their audits and provided recommendations, and then the subrecipient monitoring to make sure that that the subrecipient is complying with the grant specifications. We do independent cost reviews, some sole source, single bid reviews. Again, management may have a single source bid, so we'll come in and piggyback behind management and just do a double check for them. And we do the same thing on the advanced vehicle purchase. Again, we'll just another set of eyes after they've done their work. We do some special projects. We've done some claims and disputes. We've just helped management with a potential claim, a potential dispute. It was for a CDOT delay in which the vendor, the contractor, was allowed to, was able to receive some sort of compensation. So rather than try and get this to go to its dispute board, we're working with the project manager and the program manager to determine what's a fair approach to a settlement. So with that said, I would like a motion to approve the proposed external audit plan, please.
I'll move to approve it.
I'll second.
Thank you. So on the outstanding recommendations, which is the last area of our agenda, I just wanted to give you a status of where we are. So on the audit division, our recommendations, and this is to DAF, there was one open recommendation at this from the last time we reported. We have 11 additional, only 11 additionals just on the last staff report that was sent to the ERC members. So there's a total of 12. I'm not going to go through the 11 because we just went through the 11 in this presentation, but I'll go through the one that's still open. The OSA audit, financial and single audit, they had 2 open, 3 addition, 4 closed, and there's 1 remaining, which we'll go through in a minute. And then there was an OSA performance audit. And when I say OSA, the audit was performed by contractors hired by OSA. They weren't performed by the audit division. There were 7 open, and then they closed 7 during since the last time we spoke. So the one that's still outstanding from the audit division is with DAF. The initial implementation date was February of 25, and they've asked for an extension through July of 25. We have an impact of medium, and it's about the emergency project audit, and it has been said by by management that the senior management team has met 9 times already since the completion of the audit, and significant progress has been made. I'm not going to go through each bullet of the progress, but I think it's apparent that a lot of work has been put into this recommendation, and the reason for the extension is they just want to have thoroughness and completeness before they check the box that it's been implemented. Any questions on that? Okay. And then, I'm sorry.
I could just speak to this one real quick.
Sure.
Thanks, Frank. If you can go back to there we go. So I agreed to take the lead on this one when the audit first came out. I have a little bit of familiarity with the emergency processes. And frankly, Jeff and Keith were getting all the fun with the audit findings. So I wanted to jump in and be part of the team. We have met 9 times. There's been a couple of the items where we've decided or realized maybe not as much work needs to be done, but there were really good findings that Frank and his team had on consistency and process. Our director of procurement, Molly McLaughlin, and Keith Stefanik, right around the time this audit came out, had linked up already on making sure they were following the process that made sense to them. So we've been able to put that on paper. But I think one of the real benefits of this is that in talking about it, and we probably wouldn't have talked about it had it not been for this audit, we talked about not just how do we deal with emergency procurement and what are the steps for emergency procurement, but we're going a little broader now. And we just decided in the last month or so, we wanted to go broader. What's the process for asking the governor's office to do an emergency declaration or to get federal reimbursement? Or how do we ask you, the Transportation Commission, for those emergency funds that you sometimes provide? That wasn't really as much a part of the audit, but to be as comprehensive as we can, we're adding all of that to it. I think we've probably lost a little bit of knowledge over the years as people come and go. So this is a good time for us to put it all in paper, put it in one place that everybody can follow. So I just wanted to say it was really helpful to get the audit. We apologize for that it taken as much time as it is, but we're also going beyond the scope of the audit to make sure that we're doing the best, most complete work that we can. So appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Herman. And then on the audit with the recommendation that's still outstanding with the state auditor or OSA has been partially implemented, and they have an extension to June of 2025. Any questions? I guess Chair Adams, you said you had questions, so this is the end of the presentation. So please ask away.
I have some broad observations, Frank, and I have a couple of comments. One broad observation is I think we have to, you and I, maybe with the audit committee, have to work on definitions, because I think we're using some terms that might be a little bit, they're concerning to me. For example, we use the term audit. There's a specific definition of what is an audit. We use the term review. There's a specific definition of what is a review. And we use the term consulting or other activities, and they're all different. So when we talk about the words around risk assessment and the earlier part of your report, to me, those were more high-level observations and reviews as opposed to audits. And the audit part of it would be to test some of those observations to determine whether we have real exposure and to be able to somehow determine the actions that would be necessary to close off those. So I think we have work to do in that area with both definitions and maybe the work. Now, to me, I think you identified a lot of really good actions or concerns, and you use the word concerns. And what bothers me about that is if something breaks and we haven't taken the next step or the next actions with respect to things that you've identified as concerns, then we look as though we have not totally foreclosed off something that as a result of your risk assessment, you identified as something that was potentially a problem. And the next step regarding that is actually test it and determine if it has, in fact, other mitigating controls to minimize the risk, or if it doesn't, then we get management to put in place the steps to actually close off the risk. So that's the disconnect to me between what we call the risk assessment and the actions that, say, Jeff and the Jeff's group would actually undertake to really finish off that part. So that's an open item in my mind to say, what are the things that we should do if we've completed a risk assessment? Then how do we make sure that as commissioners and as management that we actually have undertaken things so that what you describe as a concern, we would say, well, it's not a concern because these are the actions these are the actions in place, or these are the actions that will be taking place in order to mitigate or make sure that those concerns don't become an issue. So that was one of the observations. And then I think there are other things that are clear audits, like a single audit is an audit to me. But there could be a review, which is a lower level of service than an audit. So I do think we have to spend some time talking about the distinction between what is an audit versus what is a review, because sometimes we're talking about them somewhat interchangeably, and in my mind, they're not always the same.
I agree with that statement. And as far as, the risks that we've identified, and I can send you this after this meeting if you don't want to talk about it here, is we've identified, the risks that we did identify. We sent a separate summary to management that basically outlined the problem along with a potential response for management to proceed with addressing the concern.
But what I'm getting at, Frank, is did we test the item you identified? Did we test it? Did we actually go through either doing a penetration test, or did we do some other test to see if there was some break in the system that could be undetected?
Some of these, everything that we've stated here, some of these we did perform tests. Some of these we've just experienced in prior audits. So, even though we're labeling these as concerns, we know that most of these or all of these do exist.
So, but we can talk about that, but I don't think this call is probably the place or the time to try and talk about that, because it will take more time. But Jeff has a comment he'd like to make.
Yeah, okay, Jeff.
Yeah, no, and appreciate, I guess, first of all, I'd just like to thank Frank and his team for the DAF audit that you completed previously, or that you described previously. I think it was a good effort. Appreciate the partnership, and I think there were some good recommendations that came out of it. Sometimes in an audit, what can be really helpful is just providing some impetus to act. So I think a good example of where I think that audit is going to be really helpful is with respect to the recommendation related to local invoicing. It's going to be helpful for us to be able to communicate that we have an audit finding and we need to take this serious, and folks need to help us to accelerate the timing on our partners submitting invoicing. So I wanted to first just say thank you for the work on that audit. But the other comment I wanted to make, to your point, Chair Adams, one of the things that I would say is that we hope when Frank does a risk assessment, that actually, ideally we're not seeing anything new. That what audit is identifying in the risk assessment are things that we've already identified and know to be risk areas, and in often case we're already undertaking things to address those. So I think a couple of the examples that Frank had up there, and probably one of the reasons why they're not audits, at least as of yet, are because they're already things that have been identified previously and that are subject to multiple different efforts underway. So technology systems, we have been working for quite some time now on ERP replacement efforts, assessing how to move out certain parts and of our ERP into new sort of best in breed tools. Some of those things are already happening today. So we've got a number of ongoing efforts related to the replacement of our ERP. The other one you mentioned was contracts and procurement. Similarly, you know, we have a couple of different efforts underway related to that. So I think that, you know, in the case that you have audits that you don't select, I wouldn't take that to necessarily mean that that means the risks are going unanswered. I think, you know, as I said, hopefully more often than not, when we go through risk assessment, audit is validating for us that they see risks in the same areas that management already has identified, and in many cases is moving forward on. So, and sometimes I think it's a matter of timing to sort of assess, you know, when's the best time to maybe come back and sort of test outcomes. So
Jeff, please understand, I thought about how to deliver my comment here, because I don't want you to, this is a really technical point from an audit and accounting standpoint that I'm trying to make. There is a difference, and when we are sitting as commissioners and we're either on the audit committee or we are commissioners in general, we are somewhat exposed for the way language is being used in terms of what the audit group does. And if we're not careful about some of the language, if something goes wrong, then it could easily be inferred that we had every visibility and every awareness of it, and we did not take the other appropriate actions to go with it. So I just want to make sure that as we are approving audit reports, are reports that, in my opinion, might be closer to reviews than to actual audits, we have to be careful about language. That is really the point I'm making. And what Frank largely delivered was more comments that largely talked about things that could easily be inferred as more reviews and observations, as opposed to things that were tested as part of a more rigorous audit process. That's all I'm trying to make sure we're aware of. But I think this is something that Frank and I, rather than trying to take the time during this meeting to probe more deeply, and you're more than welcome to be a part of that, I just think we have to be maybe a little bit crisper and precise about the language we're using for the work that's being done, since we all do have some potential public exposure for things that could happen within CDOT. So that's the only reason I'm bringing the point. I'm not questioning whether or not observations about concerns or issues are not valid. I'm not suggesting that. And I'm not even suggesting that we're not doing something about them. I'm just trying to bring the point about how we have to be careful about the language that's being used to describe the work that's being done.
Yeah, I understand your point, Chair Adams.
So I turn it back over to you, Chair Hart. I think trying to keep us time with wrapping up. But anyway, Frank, you and I should spend more time maybe with the rest of the committee. But I think that's just an observation that I would make for the benefit of the entire commission and as well as the staff.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Adams. If that, I guess that then concludes the presentation from the audit committee and the work that you folks need to do then. I think that's.
Yes, I think that concludes our report for the day.
Okay. Thank you. Very, very informational, and thank you, Frank, as always. I always appreciate the work that you and your staff do. It's extremely helpful to us to understand all these issues as well. So much appreciated. And folks, I think that basically concludes our agenda for today. So we can go ahead and adjourn, and we will meet again tomorrow for our breakfast meeting. Breakfast is going to be on your own since we're virtual, but we'll meet again tomorrow for our breakfast meeting, and then head right into our official Transportation Commission meeting after that. Breakfast meeting is 8 o'clock. See you tomorrow. Thanks. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.